Chapter 885. At this moment, the 5 elemental regions that he was in previously had become like the scene after the end of the world. 123 YQ. // Not only had the metal elemental region become increasingly chaotic, but the other 4 regions had also become more or less the same as the metal elemental region. All the order that had originally existed had been completely disrupted, and the originally extremely stable laws had been twisted into a mess. Under such circumstances, the separation between the 5 elemental regions had completely lost its effect. The power between the 5 regions had started to continuously mix together. Each of the 5 regions had reached the peak of one of the 5 elements, and the separation between them was extremely stable. No other kind of power could cross the gap between 2 regions and affect another region. The reason for this was that the laws between the 5 regions were extremely stable, and there was an intrinsic difference that could not be confused with the other regions. It was precisely because of this difference that the separation between the 5 regions existed. However, at this moment, the laws of each region had already been twisted into a mess, and they had long lost their original order. The various characteristics that had originally separated the 5 regions and made them seem completely different from the other regions had already disappeared. Under such circumstances, the difference that had caused the 5 regions to not affect each other had naturally disappeared without a trace. How could it still be possible to separate the 5 regions? The mixing of the power between the 5 regions had caused the 5 elemental regions, which had originally seemed like the end of the world, to become even more chaotic. The power of the 5 elements was a type of power that could reinforce and restrain each other. If it was matched well, it could display unimaginable power and produce unimaginable and mysterious effects. However, if they were not matched well, then it would be an earth-shattering disaster. Even the explosive power of an atomic bomb or hydrogen bomb would only be a very, very small part of such a disaster. In particular, the 5 regions of the 5 elemental regions had all reached the peak of the characteristics of the 5 elements, and the power between them was extremely powerful. At this moment, there was no will guiding and controlling the mixing. Instead, it was a violent and random collision. How could it produce any mysterious power? The only thing that could be produced was naturally a disaster. For the living beings that originally existed in the 5 elemental regions, such a change was a fatal one. This was a fatal change. Even if it was a being that surpassed the level of perfection, it was no exception. Their bodies and Tao would vanish in this transformation, and their souls would scatter. To connate golden immortal realm cultivators that came from outside, such a calamity wasn't so difficult to resist. All of them had merely fallen into an extremely sorry state, and at most, their bodies had collapsed, yet not a single golden immortal realm cultivator had perished amidst this calamity. Although the disaster caused by the 5 elemental impasse was strange, it was not something that could be easily predicted. Everyone was confused, but for those who were already familiar with Luo Fan, the appearance of such a disaster excited them. Because in the previous stages, the appearance of a similar disaster meant that the stage had come to an end. Soon Luo Fan would pass this stage. Many connate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm cultivators calmed down after their excitement. Even a martial monarch's emotions became rather complicated. According to the popular saying on Earth in Luo Fan's previous life, these people were all the same. It was like they had come to the bridge of times to be bystanders. Along the way, they did not play any necessary role. Even when they did play a role a few times, it was only to reduce the waste of time. It was not necessary at all. Even after going through thousands of checkpoints, which had made them admit that there was a huge gap between them and Luo Fan, they still couldn't face it indifferently. If they could be like Luo Fan and know the truth of these 9,999 checkpoints, they would know that it was only an accident that they were able to appear here. There was no other reason than the path of convergence or transcendence was not meant for many people. It was meant for teams. The essence of this path was for lone cultivators. Only when a cultivator gathered all the benefits would he be able to reach the end of the path and achieve the path of convergence or transcendence. If the benefits were distributed among the teams, even if it was divided into two equal portions, it was highly likely that none of the living beings would reach the end of the path. Instead of becoming a path of convergence or transcendence, they would die in some stage along the way. Luo Fan was naturally aware of this, which was why he no longer had any thoughts of sharing the benefits with other cultivators. Instead, he wholeheartedly grasped the benefits of the stages and worked hard to turn them into a driving force to improve his cultivation. In the end, he would be able to lead the Khanate Grand Luo to the end and become a path of convergence or transcendence. It was not selfish, but it was not selfless either. At this moment, Luo Fan wholeheartedly paid attention to the land in front of him, where even time and space seemed illusory. The changes in the space outside were becoming more and more intense, and it unwittingly affected this space more and more deeply. This space was rooted above the five elements impasse and was the other side of it. Naturally, it was still the five elements impasse that had become incredibly chaotic. The five elements impasse had become so chaotic that its original mysteries were gradually being lost. How could it not affect this space? Under this influence, the space remained calm, but the illusory feeling was becoming stronger and more obvious. It was as if the entire space could vanish without a trace at any moment. Looks like I have to hurry. With a thought, Luo Fan's body trembled, and his senses that were thousands of times stronger instantly left his body and frantically wrapped around the land that was hundreds of thousands of meters wide. Although the essence of this space was the mysteries of the five elements impasse, it was the will of the five elements impasse that was more directly connected to this space. It was the will of the five elements impasse that allowed this space to exist, or vice versa. Therefore, it was impossible for the changes in this space to not affect the will of the five elements impasse. If this space disappeared, it was very likely that the will of the five elements impasse would disappear along with it. At that time, although Luo Fan could easily destroy the core of the impasse that was fused with the will of the five elements impasse, he would lose the chance to analyze the will of the five elements to understand the will of the world and the will of the Tao. This was naturally not what Luo Fan wanted to see. It was just that the will of the world was too vast. It was too obscure. Even though Luo Fan had sent his senses into it, and even sensed the way that the will operated and sensed the various thoughts that flowed in the will, he still could not understand how the will existed. It was as if everything was just the way the world operated. It was the same as the way stars and planets operated, the way water flowed on the planet, the way time and space existed, and the way laws were distributed. Under such circumstances, let alone understand the will of the five elements impasse, Luo Fan could not even discover the trend of the changes in the five elements impasse. How could he gain anything? My senses have not reached the point where they can keep up with the operation of the will of the five elements impasse. I need to strengthen it before I can gain anything. Luo Fan frowned. He knew the key. Even though his senses were already half a step into the void comprehension realm, there was still a huge gap between him and understanding the will of the five elements impasse. It was impossible for him to achieve his final goal. To Luo Fan, perception was also a kind of power. In the world of power, everything in the world was power, and perception was naturally no exception. However, this perception was a completely different kind of power. It was a power that was more obscure, more difficult to fathom, and more illusory. This kind of power. Before Luo Fan obtained his previous breakthrough and had 1 foot in the void comprehension realm, he did not dare to casually use it. Or rather, he did not dare to casually use his own perception. It was not that he did not have the ability, it was just that perception was too important to him. Without absolute confidence that he could restore it, changing it easily was not a wise choice. At this moment, after he stepped a foot into the void comprehension realm, he'd obtained a deeper understanding of the essence of perception. Unknowingly, he already possessed the confidence that no matter how his perception changed, He had the confidence that he could restore it to its original state no matter what inconceivable changes occurred. Under such circumstances, how could he still be courteous to his perception? With a slight thought, his perception was used as the main body of power, and he threw it into the process he had gone through countless times before, searching for the combination of power that could bring out the characteristics of this power to the extreme. At this moment, Luo Fan's mind was extremely clear. It could even be said to be a kind of supreme clarity that he had never felt before. Even his main body could not compare to him at all. In such a clear state of mind, his thoughts were extremely fast. Countless profundities of power that he had comprehended for years, decades, or even centuries were now comprehensible to him with just a glance. Before long, thousands of combinations of power that could greatly increase the power of perception appeared in his mind. Each of the combinations of these powers had considerable benefits for the display of the power of perception, but none of these were what Luo Fan needed. What Luo Fan needed at this moment was a power combination that could have a profound impact on the surrounding space-time as soon as it was formed, just like the auspicious cloud or the box of completion. Although these had reached the realm of the wave of analysis and had the same profundities as the wave of analysis, they were still not what he wanted. With a slight thought, more power mysteries appeared in his mind. The thousands of combinations of power were broken up by him again, and he began to go deeper and deeper into the combinations. The auspicious cloud from before was something he had obtained by chance. Even the box of completion did not have to use a power as the main body of the combination like this, and he had to strengthen the power's power. Instead, he had used hundreds of types of power that had the effect of completing. As the main body of the combination of power, it was equivalent to having hundreds of main bodies. With such a wide net, the possibility of him gaining something naturally increased greatly. At this moment, he was searching for the combination of power in order to strengthen the power of his senses. He had completely fixed the main body of the combination of power. In comparison, compared to the combination of power from the box of completion, it was hundreds of times more difficult. Compared to the auspicious cloud, it was countless times more difficult. This was why he could not gain anything for a long time. Luo Fan had expected the difficulty of this long ago. He did not feel discouraged at all when he encountered this obstacle, nor did he feel annoyed. Even if he could faintly sense that the space-time had reached an extremely dangerous level, which meant that the will of the five extremes had reached an extremely dangerous level, he would not waver because of this. He would not be shaken by this at all. He pushed his thoughts to the limit. His mind, which had improved after stepping into the void comprehending stage, began to operate in an extraordinary manner. Countless mysteries of power surfaced from the depths of his memories. As soon as these mysteries of power surfaced, they naturally broke down into deeper and more intrinsic mysteries. They began to break down and recombine in a way that ordinary living beings would not be able to understand. But if one looked at it, they would definitely be able to comprehend countless supreme mysteries of power. The entire process proceeded at a speed that was hundreds of times faster than normal. During this process, Luo Fan felt a sense of comfort that he had never felt before. His mind became clearer and clearer, and his will became clearer and more condensed. He had already taken half a step forward, but he still had not fully gained anything. In his eyes, he seemed to be getting closer and closer. In a daze, he seemed to want to take another half step forward and put his other foot in as well. At this moment, the surrounding space changed. Countless illusory worlds revolved around him, faintly forming and dying. He also felt his entire body relax. The pressure from the five extremes will that had vaguely existed on him instantly disappeared, as if it had disappeared. It also seemed to have been isolated. With this stimulation, he immediately broke out of that state, and his mind returned to normal. It turned out that in his mind and will, the power combination that could fully unleash the power of perception had already taken shape. At this moment, the various phenomena around his body were naturally caused by the combination of power that appeared in his mind and mind. This also meant that the power combination had already reached the level of the auspicious cloud, and the completion box. It was also at the peak of the void comprehending realm. It even had half a foot in the Tao integration realm. Although it's a pity, it's still a great joy to have gained something like this. Luo Fan sighed softly. He naturally knew that if he had still been in that state, he might have already taken another step into the void comprehending realm and become a true void comprehending expert. In other words, if the power combination that could fully unleash the power of perception had been slightly more difficult or had taken a slightly longer time to take shape, he would have completed this crucial half step by relying on it. However, this might be a pity, but it also proved that the power combination that unleashed the power of perception to its limit contained profoundness was not enough to push him into the void comprehending realm. This also proved how powerful and unbelievable the void comprehending realm was, but it could also be considered another kind of gain. Luo Fan did not dwell on this regret for too long. He had already taken a step into the void comprehending realm, and becoming a void comprehending expert was only a matter of time for him. He did not have a chance to break through this time, and it was just a delay. This was not an irreparable regret to him. At this moment, the power combination that could completely unleash the power of perception had already appeared, so he naturally would not hesitate. With a slight thought, hundreds of thousands of powers evolved from the power that was almost the source of power in his body. With a sudden turn and a pour, it poured into his mind, directly causing an extremely complicated and profound transformation with his senses. These changes were so profound that almost the slightest change could make a connate Zenith Heaven cultivator gain great enlightenment and break through their current realm. At this moment, the number of these changes that were happening in Luo Fan's mind and were numbered in the trillions. These trillions of subtle and profound changes appeared at an extremely fast speed. In just a breath's time, they were all completed. At the instant the changes were completed, the countless worlds that were constantly changing around Luo Fan's body became faster and more realistic, and the range became wider. At first, it was only limited to a few hundred feet around Luo Fan. At this moment, it had already enveloped an area of several thousand kilometers. From afar, it seemed like the world that Luo Fan was in had been replaced by a group of worlds. Meanwhile, Luo Fan seemed to have become the supreme ruler of this group of worlds, the supreme god that controlled countless worlds. Luo Fan naturally saw all these changes. He smiled slightly, and with a slight thought, all the phenomena disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan's figure still appeared in the void, floating quietly. It was impossible for these phenomena to be impossible to get rid of. The appearance of these phenomena was due to the profound aura emitted by the combination of hundreds of thousands of powers that fully unleashed the power of perception. It was a scene where the surrounding space-time was naturally changed due to the existence of this combination. Under such circumstances, as long as Luo Fan completely restrained the changed aura of perception, he would naturally be able to isolate it from the outside world, and he would naturally be able to get rid of the phenomena caused by the appearance of this combination of powers in the surrounding space-time. For Luo Fan, restraining the aura of his perception was an almost instinctive ability, and he could naturally do it with a thought. However, although he had completely restrained the new aura of perception, Luo Fan still seemed different from before. It was as if he had gained a transcendent aura that he didn't have before, as if the world and space-time could no longer shackle him. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. No advertisements, no mistakes, no mistakes. // Chapter 886. With a thought, Luo Fan released his senses. His senses were still formless and did not seem any different from before. However, there was an additional indescribable aura, and his influence on the surrounding space-time was many times stronger than before. At this moment, although the space-time within the range of his senses did not seem to have changed, its owners seemed to have changed. It was as if the surrounding space within a radius of several tens of thousands of miles had turned from the space-time behind the five-element danger ground into a space-time that Luo Fan had opened up. A feeling of being able to do as he pleased and omnipotent appeared in Luo Fan's mind. This feeling was so obvious, so clear, and as his perception spread, the range of his perception became wider and wider. Previously, he had tried his best to comprehend the combination of powers that could push the power of perception to the limit, but it did not take too long. At this moment, only a few dozen breaths had passed since he realized that his senses could not understand the will of the five-element danger ground. As a result, compared to before, the will of the five-element danger ground did not seem much different. It was not truly affected by the chaos of the outside space-time, nor did it become weaker and weaker like this space-time was becoming more and more illusory. The brand new senses that were formed from the combination of hundreds of thousands of powers had undergone a tremendous change compared to Luo Fan's original senses. Its power was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. As soon as his senses, which had grown so much, entered the will of the five-element danger ground, a feeling that was completely different from before enveloped him. In a trance, Luo Fan felt like he had become the will of the world. His sense of being a living being and an individual had completely disappeared, and what replaced it was a feeling that was completely different from an individual living being. It was something that ordinary living beings could not understand, and it possessed extremely deep emotions and wisdom. The way it operated gave off a mysterious feeling, as if it was the natural circulation of the universe. This feeling was the will of the world, or rather, it was the feeling of the five-element danger ground. At this moment, the desires of all living beings seemed to have completely broken away from Luo Fan's mind. His various pursuits in the past, such as increasing his cultivation realm, attaining ultimate transcendence, becoming a sage, and being indestructible, everything about being impervious to tribulations and even love had disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. This did not mean that he had completely lost his emotions or the ability to think. It was because his emotions had been elevated to an unimaginable, indescribable state. His ability to think had also reached an indescribable level. In this state, Luo Fan forgot about the passage of time, and his mind became unprecedentedly calm, unprecedentedly clear. After an unknown period of time, a vibration of the source woke Luo Fan up from that state. The various feelings and emotions of being a living being, all sorts of emotions instantly returned to Luo Fan. Luo Fan's body faintly shook, and as the energy within his body circulated, his aura skyrocketed. In the blink of an eye, his cultivation realm had broken through the shackles of the ninth stage of the immortal realm and reached a level that matched his realm. Luo Fan's consciousness incarnation cultivated the way of power, which came from the great strength Tao master of the Tianyuan universe. Therefore, his division of realms was naturally based on the division of realms in the Tianyuan universe. It was also divided into the ninth stage of the immortal realm. Moreover, this division was simple and direct. It was clearer than the division of realms in the Earth's universe. Therefore, Luo Fan had always used this division to measure others' cultivation realm. At this moment, his cultivation level had obtained some sort of improvement. Breaking through the bottleneck meant that he had surpassed the primordial zenith heaven realm in the Earth's universe. According to the level of magic treasures, he had surpassed the great perfection realm. In the Tianyuan universe, he had surpassed the ninth stage of the immortal realm. According to the division of realms in the Tianyuan universe, there were 5 other realms above the ninth stage of the immortal realm and before the saint realm. They were the perishment realm, the void enlightenment realm, the unification realm, the transcendent realm, and the Tao master realm. However, these 5 realms were completely different from the ninth stage of the immortal realm. Between these 5 realms, the accumulation of power was only secondary. The most important thing was to understand the essence of the 5 realms. As long as one understood it, even if the power was still between the ninth stage of the immortal realm, it was equivalent to stepping into that realm. If one could not understand it, even if one accumulated endless power, one could only linger outside the door and not enter. This could be seen from the living beings in the forbidden lands that Luo Fan had encountered in the 3,334 stage to the 6,666 stage of the Five Elements Impasse. Under the blessing of heaven and earth, those living beings had obtained power that was thousands, tens of thousands, or even endless, more powerful than Luo Fan. However, they were still limited to the perishment realm. Moreover, they had barely stepped into the perishment realm. Because of this essence of the five realms, when Luo Fan broke through the ninth stage of the immortal realm, he no longer needed to step into the perishment realm and then work hard to step into the void enlightenment realm. Instead, he could directly cross over one realm after another. Even if he had comprehended the gist of trueness of the Tao Master realm, he could easily produce power that was compatible with the Tao Master realm. He could obtain the cultivation realm that was compatible with the Tao Master realm and become a true Tao Master. Moreover, at this moment, Luo Fan was only half a step into the void enlightenment realm. Naturally, there would be no obstacles to the growth of his cultivation realm. At this moment, when he crossed the peak of the ninth stage of the immortal realm, an indescribable, mysterious power was directly generated in his body. It urged his power to grow at an unimaginable speed. In an instant, it had increased by thousands of times compared to before, reaching a state where he could easily crush his previous state. This kind of growth was not forced, nor was it unnatural. It was as if the power had always been in his body and was no longer hidden at this moment. Moreover, after the growth, Luo Fan could still control the power perfectly. Although his aura had increased greatly, not a single bit of power leaked out. Every bit of power was firmly controlled by him and completely confined within his body. They didn't affect the surrounding environment in the slightest. So, this is the true half a step into the void enlightenment realm. Luo Fan felt that the power in his body was thousands of times stronger than before, but he could still control it perfectly. He could still use every bit of power as he pleased. He could not help but sigh with emotion. After the growth of all the power had completely stabilized, Luo Fan already understood that his current state was the true half a step into the void enlightenment realm. Moreover, it was also the most basic half a step into the void enlightenment realm for him. In other words, at this moment, the power in his body was just barely suitable for his realm, but it had not reached the peak of this realm. As long as he continued to cultivate, this power could continue to increase. Perhaps it could increase by hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of times. It was not impossible. I didn't expect there to be such a change. What a pleasant surprise. Luo Fan sighed leisurely, and a faint smile appeared on his face. At this moment, the place where he was no longer the strange space-time, where even time and space seemed a little illusory. Instead, he had returned to the normal five elements impasse, appearing in the middle of the endless chaotic impact of the various five elements powers. Floating in front of him, it was a strange existence with a circumference of 1 zhang. It looked like a miniature land. This miniature land was the only one that existed in the strange space-time earlier, which was a land with a circumference of several tens of thousands of zhang. Other than the difference in size, everything else was the same. It was obvious that this was the core of the five elements impasse. And above Luo Fan's head, the 1 mu wide auspicious cloud had already returned to its peak state. It completely froze the void within an area of 1 mu around Luo Fan, forming an incomparably calm area. It completely isolated all the impact forces from the outside world. It did not affect Luo Fan in the slightest. Sweeping his gaze across the surroundings, Luo Fan already understood what had happened just now. Just now, after he had sensed the will of the five elements impasse, he had transformed into the will of the five elements impasse, feeling all the feelings of this will and comprehending all the thoughts of this will. All the methods of operation had completely lost their sense of time. Time passed slowly, and before he knew it, several hours had passed. During these several hours, the chaos caused by the five elements impasse outside continued to evolve. It became more and more turbulent and chaotic, and the damage to the five elements impasse kept increasing. As a result, the space-time where the will of the five elements impasse existed, where even time and space seemed illusory, became more and more illusory. In the end, the moment before Luo Fan was jolted awake, all the changes had reached their limits, and the space-time finally collapsed and disappeared. What disappeared along with the collapse of space-time was naturally the will of the five elements impasse. It was also because the will of the five elements impasse had collapsed and disappeared that Luo Fan was able to break free from the feeling of becoming the will of the world and regain all the feelings and thoughts of an individual being. As he recalled everything that had happened, the smile on Luo Fan's face gradually changed into an indescribable wry smile. Earlier, even though he'd comprehended the various existences that were the wills of the heavens and the earth, and he'd obtained numerous benefits from it, allowing his cultivation to break through to the 9th rank of the immortal realm. However, when it came to the true understanding of the wills of the five elements, he still hadn't made much progress. Although it could not be said that he had gained nothing, it was extremely limited. The gains allowed him to vaguely understand the way the will of the world existed, but he could not put it into words. He had gained something, but he could not describe it at all, let alone summarize the mysteries of the true will of the world and the will of the ways. It was naturally impossible for him to be satisfied with such gains. The reason for this was very simple. With Luo Fan's current cultivation, it was impossible for him to truly obtain the gains that he had expected. The will of heaven and earth was an existence that could only be understood by powerful beings who had attained the Tao fruit of origin. It was a will that was completely different from ordinary beings. In order to understand this will with the will of a living being, one had to at least change their own will and reach a state that was close to the will of the world. Clearly, only a saint who had attained origin Tao fruit was able to do this. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for Luo Fan to truly sense the will of the world, no matter how hard he tried. In other words, normally speaking, even if Luo Fan's senses entered the will of the five elements impasse, it would only be the same as it was at the beginning. He could sense the countless mysteries within, but he could not understand them at all. The reason why Luo Fan could surpass his limits and enter the will of the five elements impasse was because he had changed his senses and unleashed the power of his senses to the limit. The reason why he could sense the various wills circulating was because he had changed his perception, allowing the power of his perception to be unleashed to the limit. As a result, his perception was somewhat similar to the existence form of the five-element danger grounds will to a certain extent. As a result, he had been able to experience the strange feeling of the past few hours. However, even though his senses had broken through its limits and he had obtained extraordinary comprehension, his will was still limited. His realm, however, limited the possibility for him to understand the comprehension he had obtained and limited the possibility for him to find the true profundity of those feelings. Fortunately, the will of the five elements impasse was collapsing along with the chaos of the five elements impasse. Otherwise, Luo Fan might have been directly assimilated by the will of the five elements impasse and completely lost within it. He would never be able to remember that he existed as an individual living being and would never be able to recover the various feelings of an individual living being. All sorts of thoughts. In the end, his entire body and mind would be completely integrated into the five elements impasse. His will would also become a part of the will of the five elements impasse. In that situation, for Luo Fan, who still couldn't understand just how profound the five-element danger ground will was, it was even more unbearable than death. It was even more unacceptable than having his body and Tao vanish. Luo Fan sighed to himself as he thought back to everything that had happened. With a thought, he raised his hand and pointed. A clear beam of light suddenly descended from the auspicious cloud above his head and poured into the core of the five elements impasse in front of him. The will of the five elements impasse had collapsed completely. Without the envelopment of this will, the core had lost all ability to resist since a long time ago. It had become no different from the cores of the other forbidden areas. So how could it possibly resist the clear beam of light that descended from the auspicious cloud? In an instant, the core collapsed and transformed into the finest powder before vanishing without a trace. At the instant the core collapsed, the space of the entire five elements impasse started to collapse as well. The process that had occurred a few thousand times in the past occurred. Countless spatial fragments started to spread towards the surroundings like a dense fog. The speed at which the dense fog spread surpassed the speed of time. In an instant, it swept through the entire five elements impasse that covered an area of countless light years. At the same time, the numerous connate, golden immortal realm cultivators in the depths of the five-element danger grounds that were in an extremely sorry state because of the apocalyptic changes in the five-element danger grounds felt their bodies lighten up. The various impacts of energy that caused them to be in an extremely sorry state earlier seemed to have instantly transformed into another space. Even though they still existed and collided incessantly in the surroundings, they directly passed through them and were unable to affect them in the slightest. They who were experienced since a long time ago naturally knew what was going on, and their minds instantly relaxed completely. When the light and shadows in the surroundings swiftly vanished and the area within their field of vision calmed down, only then did they notice that they'd gathered together with the others once more. Moreover, they'd clearly seen the sorry state everyone else was in. For a time, all of them were filled with sorrow. When they turned their heads again, a familiar scene appeared before their eyes. Luo Fan's figure that wasn't tall was right in front of them, and the thing that had appeared before him was the quintessence of the forbidden area that had appeared a few thousand times in the past. Unlike the few thousand times they'd seen him in the past, at this moment, a clear, colored, auspicious cloud that was the size of an acre floated above Luo Fan's head. The auspicious cloud emanated an extremely profound, clear radiance, causing all the connate, golden, immortal realm cultivators that saw the auspicious cloud to instantly feel their minds clear up. It was as if their souls had been lightly stroked, and an extremely comfortable and refreshing feeling suddenly arose from the depths of their souls. In an instant, everyone knew. Fellow Taoist Luo Fan's cultivation has improved greatly again. Even though they'd experienced such a feeling countless times, they still felt slightly shocked and slightly difficult to endure when they felt it here. In the end, their various emotions transformed into sighs of helplessness. Luo Fan casually grabbed the quintessence of the forbidden area that had already lost a great deal of might, and then a ball of black radiance flickered in his palm and directly swallowed the quintessence of the place of extremes of the five elements into that ball of radiance. With another tremble, all the profundities and energy contained within it were directly absorbed by him. With the experience he'd gained from a few thousand times in the past, and his cultivation had improved greatly, he naturally wouldn't be as clumsy and violent as he was in the past when he absorbed the quintessence of the forbidden area. He casually condensed a combination of energy that specifically targeted the quintessence of the place of extremes of the five elements, and he could completely absorb all the benefits contained within the quintessence of the place of extremes of the five elements at the fastest speed possible. As expected, because the will condensed by the forbidden area has already collapsed and disappeared, this quintessence is even slightly inferior to the quintessence of the other forbidden areas, and there aren't many commendable gains, thought Luo Fan as he carefully savored the various gains he'd obtained from the quintessence of the place of extremes of the five elements. The place of extremes of the five elements was exactly 2/3 of the way on the path of Tao convergence, or the path of transcendence. As the end of the 3,333 barriers, it should have been extraordinary, and its quintessence should have numerous profundities that the other barriers didn't have. Otherwise, how could the place of extremes of the five elements be so different from the other barriers and cause so much trouble for Luo Fan? Chapter 8 87. After completely absorbing and digesting the quintessence of the five-element impasse, Luo Fan turned around and looked at the other Khanate perfected Heaven Realm cultivators with an indifferent gaze. In an instant, he saw how the other Khanate perfected Heaven Realm cultivators were in a sorry state. With Luo Fan's gaze that could see through the surface and see straight to the essence, he instantly discerned what kind of upheaval they'd encountered and what kind of attack they'd suffered to cause them to be in such a sorry state. For a time, he couldn't help but feel emotional. After sighing, he spread his consciousness out and came into contact with the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge that was hidden in a mysterious place. At this moment, Luo Fan was already at the half-step void in Lightning Realm. Although the Era Bridge had surpassed the perfected realm, its essence was at most equivalent to the Perishment Realm. Because it wasn't restricted by a body, the power it could exert might surpass the Perishment Realm, but it wouldn't surpass it by too much. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan could be said to possess absolute strength to crush the Era Bridge at this moment. Furthermore, 1/18 of the components of the Bridge of the Era were refined by him, which made his advantage over the Bridge of the Era even greater. Therefore, at this moment, he could easily find the location of the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge. When he sensed the location of the treasure spirit, Luo Fan was even more certain about his speculation about the five-element impasse. Sure enough, it was very likely that the 9,999 barriers on the Bridge of the Eras had been created by a certain mighty figure for the sole purpose of allowing cultivators to reach the Tao integration stage or the transcendence stage. The reason why he had such a feeling was because the treasure spirit actually possessed something that should never have possessed. It was something that was countless times stronger than Luo Fan's current aura. It even caused his soul to tremble when he came into contact with it, and he couldn't control his own aura. The aura was extremely weak, and it was hidden unimaginably deep. Its existence was extremely deep. It was deep within the treasure spirit's will, even deeper than the core of the treasure spirit. Such an aura did not possess any special power, and it was impossible for it to possess any sort of will. It was impossible for Luo Fan to find any information or memories from it. However, it meant that an existence with such a powerful aura had changed the treasure spirit of the Bridge of the Era. This aura was the remnant traces left behind by this change. It was this change that allowed the treasure spirit of the Bridge of the Era to arrange the 9,999 checkpoints in such a mysterious way. Or rather, it was this change that allowed the Bridge of the Era's treasure spirit to arrange the 9,999 checkpoints. This greatly increased the strength of the treasure spirit of the Bridge of the Era, allowing it to withstand the 9,999 stages. This is the 6,667th pass, the 10th era before the end of days, the Age of Giants. The method to clear this stage is to destroy this era. Just as Luo Fan was about to take a closer look at the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge to see what mysteries it contained, the treasure spirit didn't wait for Luo Fan's signal and directly spoke. His voice came from a void and entered the ears of Luo Fan and the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators. Then, after the voice came out, the treasure spirit of the Bridge of the Era trembled, and then disappeared as if it had never appeared. Luo Fan's heart trembled, and his expression became solemn. Looks like it already knows my goal. Is that existence still watching from somewhere? Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. When this thought flashed through his mind, he forcefully suppressed his desire to look up at the sky above, and the aura around him instantly became extremely restrained, not revealing a trace of it. At this moment, the treasure spirit was completely different from before. It was clearly under the control of some existence, and it wanted to completely avoid Luo Fan's inspection. This treasure spirit didn't have any consciousness, and Luo Fan was one of its masters after all. It shouldn't have any thoughts of avoiding Luo Fan's inspection. For such a situation to occur, there must be some existence above Luo Fan that controlled the treasure spirit and made it completely hide. In fact, it was very likely that this existence was directly hiding the treasure spirit. If not, with the treasure spirit's cultivation level that surpassed the perfected stage, it was too difficult for it to avoid Luo Fan's senses and hide at a place that Luo Fan couldn't sense. Since it was so powerful, just the remnant aura alone made Luo Fan's soul tremble, and the powerful existence was looking down at him. Then under the circumstances that he couldn't compare to it, Luo Fan's best choice was naturally to suppress his displeasure and eliminate all factors that might cause that person to be displeased. That was why he had completely retracted his aura and suppressed his desire to look up. The 6,667th level is actually a projection of the era, and it's a projection of the era before the Age of Chaos. Right at this moment, an exclamation resounded. It was a connate, golden, heavenly realm cultivator who was shocked when he heard what the treasure spirit said, and he couldn't help but exclaim with surprise. This exclamation caused Luo Fan to return to his senses from the shock of that powerful existence, and he started to pay attention to the difference between the 6,667th level and the other levels. As for whether that existence that was countless times more powerful than him was looking down at him, where exactly it was, and what exactly it was thinking, all of these weren't things that he could care about at all, so he could only put it aside for now. Amongst the past, present, and future, the past is eternal and the only one. The present is the only one that ordinary living beings can control, whereas the future has countless. The first third of the levels were projections of some random times from the Age of Chaos. They were completely independent of each other, and it was even to the extent that, because it was too long ago from the Age of Chaos, their relationship with the Age of Chaos was relatively independent as well. On the other hand, the projections of the restricted areas in the middle third of the levels were projections from boundless space. They weren't divided into past, present, and future, yet they could be taken to be the only present that living beings could control. At this moment, the 6,667th level is a projection of the past. Looks like the next third of the levels are projections of the past, and they represent the eternal and the only past. Luo Fan thought in this way. If it was in the past, he would think that the levels on the bridge of time were random and formed naturally. He would absolutely not analyze it in this way, because he still hadn't walked through the 9,999 levels to the end. So he was unable to analyze the profundities of these levels as a whole. Under such circumstances, the information he obtained and analyzed at this moment might be extremely accurate. But in the end, it might be extremely different from the true information. After all, there might be many reasons that could cause the same situation, and it was utterly impossible to make an accurate judgment without considering all the information. But that was only in the past. At this moment, after discovering that there was still some kind of shocking almighty hidden behind these 9,999 levels, he was almost certain that his analysis was correct, no matter how powerful that almighty was. Even if he reached the sage level, he would still be a living being. As a living being, everything he did was naturally set up for his ultimate goal. Although Luo Fan wasn't sure why that almighty had set up this Tao integration path or transcendence path, no matter what, the goal was for the cultivators who walked this path to become Tao integration realm or transcendence realm. Under such circumstances, the establishment of these levels naturally couldn't be random. There had to be some kind of pattern. Compared to the natural and random levels, this pattern had to be more concise. It had to be more concise. The first one-third of the levels were all projections of the future of the Dharma ending age, which represented endless changes. The first one-third of the levels were all projections of the future of the Dharma ending age, which represented endless changes. The future that was untraceable. The middle third of the levels were completely blurred, and some relatively independent restricted areas represented the present that could be completely controlled. Based on this deduction, the remaining one-third of the checkpoints should indeed reach the eternal and unchanging one and only pass. Of course, this kind of eternity only represented the original past. At this time, what appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes was only a projection of the past era, and it could be imagined that the following levels would only appear in front of him. Naturally, it couldn't be eternal and unchanging. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan had vaguely grasped the context of that almighty setup. Even though he was somewhat displeased with that almighty, Luo Fan couldn't help but praise such a setup. The past, the present, and the future represent the three states of existence of time, and the endless and various void states in each level represent the characteristics of space. Combining them, they form a complete space-time. It's indeed the best aid for a cultivator to transcend. Naturally, Luo Fan couldn't directly tell the various conjectures in his mind to the Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators. Not to mention that it wouldn't be of any use to them and would only add to their troubles. He wasn't prepared to say it even if it was of some use. After all, it was very likely that the Almighty was currently overlooking their various actions from high above. If he were to say all these conjectures and anger that existence, it wouldn't be worth it. The projection of the age of the giant gods still looked like the starry sky of the universe. In other words, the age of the giant gods was also a universe formed after the Earth's universe was completely disappointed with the sages. Furthermore, the age of the giant gods would definitely reject the sages, and the possibility of the sages existing within it was extremely small. After figuring this out, Luo Fan finally felt slightly relieved. Although this level was also a projection of an era, it was a projection of the past, and it was the beginning of the last two-thirds of the levels. Naturally, it wouldn't be the same as the first one-third of the levels, and there would definitely be more difficulties. Under such circumstances, eliminating the possibility of the existence of the sages naturally made one feel more at ease. At this moment, the Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators had already regained their composure. Their previous exclamations were merely because they were momentarily agitated by the strange construction of the levels. However, it didn't mean that they couldn't control themselves. Previously, in the extreme grounds of 5 elements, many of the Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators were in a sorry state due to the destruction of the extreme grounds of 5 elements. It was even to the extent that most of the Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators had lost their bodies, and only their souls or primordial spirits were left. Now that they had calmed down, they naturally wouldn't allow themselves to remain in such a state. All of a sudden, each of them used their abilities and tried their best to recover their bodies. As Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators, everything had been perfected, and their vitality was naturally self-sufficient. Although absorbing vitality from the outside world could greatly speed up their cultivation speed, it wasn't necessary. At this moment, they had just stepped into this brand new level. After stepping into the projection of a brand new era, it was naturally impossible for them to casually absorb the vitality of this era to cultivate. Therefore, although they were all using abilities and methods that required a huge amount of vitality to reform their bodies, there were only various flashes of light in the field. However, it did not produce any origin chi, let alone any origin chi vortex or anything like that. When Luo Fan saw everyone's appearance, a thought crossed his mind, and he cast his gaze towards the universe of the giant gods era. At this moment, whether it was his realm or cultivation, he had completely stepped into the half-step void, comprehending realm. Everything he saw had almost exhausted all mysteries and was almost at the origin of nothingness. With just a glance, he had already obtained countless mysteries of the projection of this era. The projection of this era spanned hundreds of millions of light years. It was hundreds of millions of times larger than any of the forbidden areas. Luo Fan naturally could not use the method he had used in the 5 elements impasse before, which was to use his own analytical waves to analyze the space-time within the entire checkpoint. Not to mention how strong his mind's ability to withstand information. It would take him hundreds of years just to travel across the entire universe and spread the analytical waves to the entire universe. Therefore, Luo Fan could only use the method he used in the first third of the level. He used various traces and the remnants of the core of the projection to find the location of the core. At this moment, the perception and perspective brought by his half-step void, comprehending realm, was much stronger than the power perspective. Compared to the power view, it was much better. What he could see from this view was also countless times more than the power view. What he had obtained with that one glance was comparable to what he had obtained after spending several months with his original power vision. If this level was still the first third of a level, even if it was the 3,333rd level, a glance would be enough for him to instantly grasp the traces of the core of the projection of the era and even roughly deduce the location of the core. However, this was not the first third of the level. This level was the last third of the level. Although this level was also a projection of the era, it was many times more realistic than the previous levels. However, it was many times more realistic than the previous stages. Moreover, the core of the era projection that originally existed had many unimaginable changes compared to the previous stages. Such changes caused Luo Fan to obtain countless mysteries of the giant god's era with a glance. But he could not find a trace of the existence of the core of the projection of the giant god's era at all. It was as if this was a real era, a real universe, and there was no projection core at all. Just as I thought, Luo Fan had naturally expected this, and was not too disappointed when he found that he did not obtain the final reward. Even the 6,666th level, where the core of the projection of the 5 elements was not so easy to find, let alone the 6,667th level. For the sake of a cultivator's path to become a convergent or a transcendent, the difficulty would not be reversed, right? After thinking about it, Luo Fan turned to the others and said, "This projection of the giant god's era is completely different from the previous ones, and it's not easy to deal with it in a hurry. Why don't we open up a space-time and cultivate for a while before exploring it?" Luo Fan's words stunned the many connate Zenith Heaven cultivators. This was the projection of the era, but the 6,667th level on the bridge of the eras was not the real universe. It was not a simple matter to open up a space-time here, and it could even be said that it was impossible to do so without understanding the era for thousands of years. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan suddenly said such words as if opening up a space-time here was as easy as flipping his hand. How could they not be stunned? However, they reacted extremely quickly and instantly realized their mistake. They could not open up a space-time here, but it did not mean that Luo Fan could not do it. After all, before Luo Fan broke through the previous level, he was already tens of thousands of times stronger than the strongest of them. Now that he had broken through again, who could say for sure what he could achieve? How could they assume that Luo Fan could not do it if they could not do it themselves? After realizing their mistake, they were both shocked and delighted, and they hurriedly said that they could not ask for more. They had only set foot on the bridge of the eras for almost 1,000 years, and this period of time was just the time for them to take a nap. However, on the bridge of the eras, they were living like stray dogs, living in fear and anxiety. They had been eagerly looking forward to a period of time where they could cultivate properly. How could they be unwilling when they heard that Luo Fan could open up a space-time for them to cultivate? Luo Fan nodded with a smile when he saw everyone's impatient look. Chapter 888. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and suddenly grabbed the void in front of him. In an instant, the infinite laws of the age of the giant gods were instantly broken by his grasp. The laws of the tens of thousands of miles in front of him were directly separated from the projection of the entire age of the giant gods, forming an independent entity. After these laws of the age of the giant gods were separated, they began to change violently with Luo Fan's thoughts, and then interweaved and arranged in front of Luo Fan, gradually outlining the appearance of a mysterious mark. This brand was extremely complicated and mysterious. It was extremely similar in nature to the core brand of the core of the 5 elements impasse back in the 5 elements impasse. Both were unimaginably complex and earth-shattering. This mark was obviously constructed by Luo Fan by combining the original origin brand and the various mysteries of the age of the giant gods. Its power was mysterious and had its own mysteries. As soon as it took shape, it began to compress at an indescribable speed. In the blink of an eye, it was compressed from the original size of tens of thousands of miles to the size of a tiny speck of dust. In the surroundings, the projection of the age of the giant gods lost the laws of the tens of thousands of miles, but there was not much of a reaction, and there was not much damage. The resilience of the entire projection of the age of the giant gods had naturally repaired the loss of the laws of the age of the giant gods within a breath. It did not seem to be any different from before, as if the laws of the age of the giant gods had never been cut out by Luo Fan. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan was obviously not surprised. After all, when he grabbed the laws of the projection of the age of the giant gods, the means he used seemed rough, but in fact, it was in accordance with some extremely mysterious method. The whole process was not just about grabbing and breaking the laws of the age of the giant gods. He also avoided all factors that might cause too much damage to the projection of the age of the giant gods, and avoided all kinds of things that might provoke a violent reaction from the projection of the age of the giant gods. Although all the laws of the age of the giant gods have been grabbed in such a vast area of tens of thousands of miles, the impact was in fact just like the collapse of the void, and such damage was insignificant to any projection of the era. That was why such a situation had occurred. That one was compressed to the size of a speck of dust. After the intrinsically complex mark that contained endless mysteries was compressed to the limit, it abruptly shuddered, abruptly producing a time and space that was miraculously connected to the projection of the age of giant gods. A more complete, more complicated, and more mysterious space was constructed within it. As soon as that space-time appeared, it began to expand continuously. In addition to time and space, it also began to add many things that the giant god era had. Not long after, the space-time had expanded to a radius of tens of thousands of light years. Countless planets were arranged into the shape of a whirlpool, forming a huge galaxy. When the galaxy finally took shape, the entire space-time trembled again. The extremely complex mark formed by the laws of laws also shook slightly. It disappeared in front of everyone, as if it had merged into the void of the age of the giant gods. It also seemed to have formed its own space-time and was on the same level as the space-time of the age of the giant gods. When this happened, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. With a casual point of his finger, a door that was about 10 meters tall appeared in the void. The door was extremely simple. Although it was formed from light, it naturally emanated an extremely stable aura. Behind the door was still a starry sky, and it simply looked like the door was just an ordinary door frame. "Everyone, please." After doing all that, Luo Fan said to the Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators. The Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators have been watching the entire process of Luo Fan opening up a space-time, and they were already dumbfounded. They felt that everything was so incomprehensible. Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators all had the ability to open up space-time and create worlds. The Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators present were naturally no exception. Every single one of them had opened up space-time and created worlds. Although some were lesser kiliocosms, some were medium kiliocosms, and some were not even comparable to lesser kiliocosms. After all, they all knew what the process of opening up space-time and creating worlds was. It was precisely because they knew what the process was that they were so shocked and dumbfounded by the entire process of Luo Fan opening up a space-time. They'd never imagined that opening up a space-time would actually be so easy and so simple. Based on Luo Fan's actions just now, he'd practically just casually grabbed at space before that expanse of space shattered naturally. After that, a brand was formed, the brand was compressed, and the space recovered before the brand vanished without a trace. After that, the door that led to the newly opened space-time appeared before them. This was simply even easier than eating, and saying that it was as easy as flipping one's hand was an exaggeration. He's actually so formidable. In an instant, similar thoughts appeared in the minds of all of them, and it allowed them to clearly sense how enormous the gap between them and Luo Fan was. It was even to the extent that the process of them opening up a world had started to appear in the minds of many of them. 4 Khanate Grand Luo Realm Cultivators. Even if they were Khanate Grand Luo Realm Cultivators that specialized in opening up space-time and creating worlds, if they wanted to open up a space-time for the sole purpose of destroying it and not pursuing stability, then they would have to make countless preparations. Moreover, they would have to gather countless materials and even refine numerous artifacts or magic treasures before they could open up a space-time and create a world in the end. Moreover, even after they'd made so many preparations, the process of opening up a space-time was absolutely not as easy as they'd imagined. They practically had to exhaust all their energy to construct an enormous formation, rely on the might of magic treasures and artifacts, rely on numerous materials, utilize innumerable methods, and work for years, decades, centuries, or even millennia, or tens of thousands of years before they could barely open up a space-time. After that, they even had to spend an even longer time to set up that space-time. They had to make the space-time stable, balanced, and complete before they could allow others to enter it in the end. No matter how weak the space-time was, they would still need to make so many preparations in order to open up a space-time of their own. In a situation where so many actions were required, Luo Fan, who was in a brand new era, casually grabbed at the void. The entire process took only a few breaths, but he had already opened up a rather complete space-time that looked extremely vast at the moment. It was not much different from the age of the giant gods, so how could they be balanced? How could they not be shocked? For a moment, everyone was shocked, but no one dared to enter that space-time first. Luo Fan naturally saw the changes in their minds, but he was not anxious. He quietly waited for them to come back to their senses. Everyone present was a Khanate Grand Luo Realm Cultivator, and their control over their own minds was beyond imagination. They quickly came back to their senses. Among them, the first to come back to his senses was the Martial Emperor, who had the strongest cultivation base. After the Martial Emperor came back to his senses, without any hesitation, he turned into a ray of mysterious light and charged into that space-time. From his actions, it could be seen that the door was a real space-time door, because he charged into it, and within this space and time. Between the space-time, he did not rush out from the other side of the door. Clearly, he had entered another space-time. The second to come back to his senses was not another existence with greater strength. It was the Sky Maiden. The Sky Maiden, whose cultivation base was only at the peak of the 8th order of a mortal realm. The reason why the Sky Maiden recovered so quickly was rather complicated, but needless to say. After she came back to her senses, she did not look at Luo Fan or anyone else. She took a step forward, and in a flash, she had already entered the door. After the Sky Maiden, the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators also came back to their senses one after another. They either apologized to Luo Fan or ignored him and entered the door one after another. After everyone had passed through the door, Luo Fan smiled and entered the door with a thought. The door shook and disappeared without a trace, as if it did not exist at all. In an instant, the projection of the age of the giant gods had completely lost the figures of Luo Fan and the others. In the space-time that Luo Fan had opened up, Luo Fan and the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators were currently hovering in the boundless void. The space-time was tens of thousands of light years wide, and it also looked like the universe. However, there was only one river system in the shape of a vortex. There were countless stars and planets in this river system. Among them, every star's position was in accordance with a certain mysterious law, and the planets were also in accordance with that law. Due to the law that the stars and planets were in accordance with, the entire river system emitted a mysterious aura, as if it was a huge formation. Anyone who saw it from the outside would know that the river system was not simple, and that there must be some unimaginable profundity within it. As expected, as soon as Luo Fan spoke, he confirmed the feelings of the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators. This river system was built according to my understanding of the era of the giant gods and the era vortex, and it has the effect of distorting time. The closer to the center of the river system, the faster the flow of time will be. At the center, the flow of time is roughly 3,650,000 times faster than the time of the projection of the age of the giant gods in the outside world. However, the faster the flow of time, the higher the requirement for the cultivator, so I hope that everyone can make a decision based on your ability. 3,650,000 times. Such a figure appeared in the minds of the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, but they were strangely not as shocked as before. Clearly, although such a speed of time was shocking, compared to the method of opening up a space-time that was tens of thousands of light-years wide with countless stars and planets with a casual grab, it seemed to be reasonable and not shocking at all. After Luo Fan finished speaking, he said to the martial monarch, "I'm going to the center. Brother Wu, do you want to go with me?" When the martial monarch heard Luo Fan's words, he understood that with his strength, it was impossible for him to endure the flow of time that was 3,650,000 times faster. Luo Fan had invited him to go with him because he wanted to protect him. He felt grateful in his heart, but he didn't intend to accept Luo Fan's good intentions. So, he said, "Brother Luo, go ahead. Traveling through this river system is greatly beneficial to my comprehension of the profundities of time. I'll explore it myself. All right. If Brother Wu needs anything, just holler loudly no matter where you are, and I'll be there in a moment." Luo Fan naturally respected the martial monarch's choice, so he just smiled and said. The martial monarch naturally nodded. Luo Fan turned around and was about to leave. Suddenly, he sensed a strand of consciousness tremble slightly amidst the numerous Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, and it seemed to be extremely agitated. When he turned around, he noticed that the source of that consciousness was Sky Maiden. At the same time, he noticed that Sky Maiden's current state of mind wasn't very stable. Thoughts flashed through his mind, yet for some unknown reason, he had the thought of giving her some preferential treatment. At Luo Fan's level, once a thought arose in his mind, he would naturally act on it. He didn't move at all. A shapeless existence condensed out of thin air and appeared before Sky Maiden outside the scope of the senses of the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators. The reason why Sky Maiden's state of mind was shaken earlier was none other than because she noticed that Luo Fan had actually completely treated her like the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, and he didn't think there was anything special about her. Women were like that. Even though she'd already decided not to get entangled with a certain person, and she'd completely severed all thoughts of developing a deeper relationship with that person, she was slightly disgruntled when that person really did the same thing. She felt that he'd gone too far. Even though Sky Maiden was already a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator, and she was even a rather formidable one. However, she wasn't completely free from conventions. Sky Maiden was slightly stunned when such a shapeless and immaterial existence suddenly appeared out of thin air before her. When she noticed that the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators didn't react at all as if they hadn't noticed it at all, she instantly understood why this existence had appeared, and her heart was suddenly filled with indescribable joy. She turned her gaze to look at Luo Fan, but she noticed that even though Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all, his gaze seemed to occasionally sweep past her. At this point, how could she still not understand that her guess was correct? With a single thought, her senses instantly enveloped this shapeless and immaterial existence. In an instant, a calm thought was received by her through her senses. This thing can increase one's tolerance towards the speed of light by 10 times. Amidst her joy when she sensed this thought, the Sky Maiden somehow felt slightly disappointed. She raised her hand and put the shapeless and immaterial existence away. As soon as it entered her body, she felt her entire body lighten as if some sort of shackles that had been placed on her had been completely removed. Amidst her joy, she looked at the spot where Luo Fan had been, only to realize that Luo Fan had vanished without a trace. He had left after passing the shapeless and immaterial existence to her. This is already great. What else am I looking forward to? Sky Maiden sighed lightly. She forcefully suppressed the disappointment in her heart and thought so. Although she thought so, she still felt that the joy from before had mostly vanished, and the various interests she had before had completely vanished as well. With a thought, she easily fused into the void. As if she was in Earth's universe, she directly teleported and left. Her actions made the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators exclaim in admiration. One must know that this was the space-time that Luo Fan had opened up. It was completely different from Earth's universe, and it was completely different from any space-time or world that they had comprehended before. Under such circumstances, if they wanted to be able to teleport at, like Earth's universe, they would need at least many years to comprehend the mysteries of the space-time, as well as the laws and rules of the space-time. However, at this moment, the Sky Maiden seemed to have been exempted from this process. She could teleport so easily as soon as she stepped into this place. How could they not be surprised? They even faintly suspected that the Sky Maiden had concealed her cultivation realm. However, these were merely thoughts that flashed through the minds of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators. As soon as these thoughts flashed through their minds, they used their own techniques to either turn into streaks of light or directly fuse into the void. They charged towards the river system ahead. It must be known that the fastest time flow in this galaxy could reach 3,650,000 times that of the outside world. In other words, it could reach more than 365 times that of the Earth's universe. However, this change in the flow of time was the result of the interaction between the structure of this galaxy and the laws of space and time. Hence, the flow of time outside the river system was only equivalent to the giant god's era in the outside world. Only by stepping into the river system would the flow of time increase, and they would have more time to cultivate. Under such circumstances, the more time they spent outside the river system, the more time they wasted outside the river system. It was equivalent to wasting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of times more time. This was naturally unacceptable to them. As soon as they entered the river system ahead, the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators split up into groups of 3 to 5. After all, everyone's tolerance towards the flow of time was different. If they did not have a deep relationship with each other, why would they accommodate each other for the sake of others? Fellow Taoist Luo Fan's ability really is shocking. After they stepped into the river system, all the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators could not help but have such thoughts in their minds. The reason for this was none other than the fact that they could clearly sense how natural the flow of time in the surroundings was during this process. Time seemed to have become a type of light that existed naturally. There were no obvious intervals at all, and the flow of time kept increasing as they moved forward. During this process, they could not even sense that the flow of time was increasing. Only when they started to compare the flow of time did they realize that the flow of time had increased by so much without them realizing it. Chapter 889. Previously, Luo Fan had only given the Sky Maiden some preferential treatment on a whim. After completing his whim, he naturally would not waste any more time with the Sky Maiden. Therefore, after sensing that the Sky Maiden had integrated the existence that he had given her into her body, he did not waste any more time. He directly crossed the void and arrived at the center of the river system that he had created. It was a region where the flow of time was 365 million times faster than the outside world. This river system was created by Luo Fan. Although he could not change the structure of this river system at will, in order to conform to the laws of the giant god era and the mysteries of the vortex at that time, it did not mean that he could not make changes to this river system. However, that did not mean that he could not make changes to this river system. The central region of this river system was specially prepared for him, so it naturally could not be the same as other regions. There was a continent at the center of the continent. It was a continent that was not considered big, with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. This continent had everything that a normal continent should have. There were mountains, rivers, hills, plains, swamps, and even a medium-sized ocean surrounding this continent. The entire continent looked no different from a normal world where the sky was round and the earth was square. The stability of this continent had reached an unimaginable level. Even a vast thousand worlds could not compare to it. On the other hand, the flow of time, there was an entire 3,650,000 times faster than the outside world. Even if the difference between the flow of time on the bridge of times and the outside world in the Earth's universe was taken into account, it was also 365 times faster than the Earth's universe. In other words, 1 year in the Earth's universe was equivalent to 365 years on this continent. It was equivalent to 365 million years in the projection of the giant god era on the Bridge of Times. With such a mystery, it could be said that Luo Fan had some time to squander here. This was usually before he passed the checkpoint of the Five Elements impasse. It did not mean much to Luo Fan, but it was crucial to him at this moment. The reason was simple. At this moment, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had already reached the half-step void comprehending realm. He had already completely broken through all the obstacles to the true void comprehending realm. As long as he had enough time, he would definitely be able to become a void comprehender. Clearly, after learning that the 9,999 trials formed a Tao integration path or a transcendence path, Luo Fan was filled with a strong sense of urgency. Before he obtained the progress that he expected to make, he lacked the necessary sense of security to continue on the Tao integration path or the transcendence path. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how important this region, where the flow of light was 365 million times faster than the outside world, was to him. Luo Fan took a step forward. He arrived at the cave abode that he had specially prepared for himself when he first opened up this space-time. This cave dwelling was very ordinary. It was just a very ordinary-looking cave. However, this cave was directly connected to the entire space-time, the entire galaxy, and the entire continent. The space-time, the river system, and all the changes on the continent were reflected on the walls of the cave. By letting Luo Fan cultivate in this cave, it was as if he was with the entire space-time and the entire galaxy. It was as if the entire continent had fused together. This was rather beneficial to his cultivation. Naturally, this was the most suitable place for him to cultivate in the river system. Although it was a cave, with Luo Fan's ability, it was obviously impossible for him to just make a hole in the mountain. Instead, he had carried out an extremely subtle combination of every rise and fall in the cave, as well as the shape of every rock, so that the cave was filled with Tao aura and profound truths of the great Tao. Moreover, it could also make people who cultivated in it feel extremely comfortable. However, it was a world of difference from an ordinary cave. If an ordinary living being fell into this cave, as long as it had the slightest bit of intelligence, it would definitely be able to obtain endless benefits from it. From there, it would attain immortality, and it would be able to use great abilities and techniques. Everything in this cave was opened up by Luo Fan. Naturally, he was very familiar with this. After stepping into the cave, there was no need for him to waste time observing the mysteries of the cave. He directly sat down on the cushion that he had prepared in the cave and entered a state of cultivation where there was no one around him. Endless mysteries regarding the emptiness realm surged out from the depths of his memories. They continuously flowed through his mind, allowing him to continuously comprehend the various mysteries within and deepen his understanding of the emptiness realm. During this process, his cultivation realm began to slowly progress towards the true emptiness realm. The endless truths of the world and the mysteries of the universe were continuously engraved in his life source. The world within his senses began to slowly but firmly change. As for the cave abode that Luo Fan was in, as he entered this state of cultivation, it began to undergo an extremely weak but unimaginably profound change. The entire abode began to move slowly, but it was also squirming according to some extremely complicated pattern. The squirming was extremely weak. If it was divided into specific areas, it would only be a slight tremble in that area. However, when gathered together, it evolved all sorts of truths of the world and the mysteries of the universe. Even the mysteries of the great Tao were directly laid out. The squirming of the cave abode was not isolated. Outside the cave abode, where Luo Fan was, the continent that flowed 65 million times faster than the outside world, also began to shake mysteriously. The shaking was extremely profound, causing all the living beings living on the continent to undergo all sorts of inexplicable changes. Every living being's aptitude and power increased slightly along with the shaking. An atmosphere of evolution began to appear on the continent. More and more living beings gained sentience and unknowingly stepped onto the path of cultivation. There was no trace of the entire process at all, as if it was the result of the natural evolution of the world. Its mysteries could not be described with words. According to the situation on the continent, in a few years, an extremely prosperous cultivation civilization would definitely appear on the continent. Perhaps it would be an exaggeration to say that great perfection-level cultivators would appear, but pure yang-level cultivators would definitely not be a problem. The boundary between the continent and the outside world was a faint but extremely firm layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire. This layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire was only a few hundred kilometers thick, but it was enough to isolate everything on the continent from the outside world. This prevented the Yuan Qi from escaping into the outside world. At the same time, it protected the countless living beings on the continent, preventing them from being harmed by any changes in the outside world. After Luo Fan entered this state of cultivation, the layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire also followed the cave abode. As the continent changed, an invisible wave began to affect the astral wind, lightning, and fire. As the astral wind, lightning, and fire spread out, gradually spreading to the entire river system, causing the entire river system to be enveloped in this inexplicable wave. Of course, the closer one was to the edge of the river system, the weaker the wave's influence was. The fluctuations were also harder to sense. On the other hand, every single innate, golden immortal who sensed the ripples could clearly sense the invisible aura of the Tao contained within the ripples. It was a will that had fused with the Grand Tao, a will that was developing the profundities of the Grand Tao and the invisible aura of the Tao that was revealed when the truths of the world were revealed. This sort of shapeless aura of the Tao was extremely beneficial to the cultivation of any living being, and it was even more so for Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators. Therefore, when he sensed these Taoist rhymes, he felt a chill run down his spine. Practically all the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators were pleasantly surprised, and they sped up and headed towards the depths of the river. He worked hard to find a stronger Tao aura. However, no matter how they advanced, they could only feel that the closer they got to the center of the river system, the more obvious, clearer, and easier to sense. In the end, they could only helplessly stop at the limit of their tolerance for the flow of time and seize the time to cultivate and comprehend this invisible fluctuation. Among them, the one with the strongest ability to withstand the flow of time wasn't anyone else. It was the Sky Maiden. She'd reached the region where the flow of time was 360,000 times faster before she reached her limit, and she couldn't go any further. There was no need to elaborate on the reason behind this. It was precisely because of the effect of the mysterious existence that Luo Fan had given her. If it wasn't for that existence, the Sky Maiden could only reach the region where the flow of time was 36,000 times faster at most. Her tolerance was only inferior to the Sky Maiden. It was the Martial Emperor. He'd reached the limit of the region where the flow of time was 300,000 times faster in the outside world. However, he had always relied on his own strength. He had always relied on himself. He hadn't relied on any external forces at all. If he hadn't relied on the mysterious existence that Luo Fan had taught the Sky Maiden to cheat, he should have been able to reach the depths. The strongest amongst the 20-plus Golden Immortal Realm cultivators behind the Martial Monarch Realm had merely arrived at the area where the flow of time was 70 to 80,000 times faster, and the gap between them and the Martial Monarch Realm was rather huge. However, even the weakest amongst them with the lowest cultivation could withstand the flow of time that was at least 10,000 times faster than the outside world. It was sufficient to recover the flow of time that was slowed down by the bridge of time, and it couldn't be considered to be too bad. Regions with different flows of time were naturally at different distances from the center of the galaxy. The fluctuations they sensed from Luo Fan's cultivation were naturally different as well. Amongst them, the slower the flow of time was, the further away they were from the center, and the weaker the fluctuations they sensed. Thus, amongst all of them, the effects of the Sky Maiden's cultivation weren't just 36 times greater than the cultivator at the outermost region, and it could even be said to be 360 times or 3,600 times faster. Besides the strength of the fluctuations, the difference in the flow of time had to be taken into account as well. This had unknowingly caused the various connate golden immortal realm cultivators to form a difference of levels. The cultivators at the outermost region were naturally rather helpless towards such a situation, yet they could only accept it. It was even to the extent that they had to make the best use of their time and double their efforts with the hope that they would be able to close this gap as much as possible. Under such circumstances, the entire galaxy seemed to be calm. As Luo Fan and the other connate golden immortal realm cultivators cultivated in meditation, time passed by slowly, and in the blink of an eye, 2 million years had passed. During these 2 million years, Luo Fan was constantly comprehending the profundities of the state of void comprehension, and his cultivation was improving more and more obviously at every single moment. On this day, after 2 million years, he'd finally pushed his cultivation past a limit. The world that he saw, the heavens and the earth that he sensed, and the thoughts that flowed through his mind had undergone a tremendous change in an instant. All matter, energy, laws were no longer secrets to him. An indescribable feeling of emptiness filled his mind. This emptiness wasn't the emptiness of loneliness, but the emptiness that he suddenly felt as if the heavens and the earth were the universe. The emptiness that he didn't know any longer in this boundless space. And it was the emptiness that he had to comprehend himself. It was the emptiness of being unable to find an objective or a direction to move forward. This was void comprehension. The void comprehension that had comprehended everything and reached straight into nothingness. When this feeling of emptiness appeared in Luo Fan's mind, it meant that Luo Fan had completely stepped into the state of void comprehension, and he'd truly become a void comprehender. The moment Luo Fan completely became a void comprehender, the space that Luo Fan had opened up underwent a tremendous change. An invisible and intangible light burst out from the cave where Luo Fan was located. In an instant, it enveloped the entire space-time from afar. It enveloped the entire galaxy that spanned several tens of thousands of light years and everything within it. This kind of light was extremely mysterious, as if it contained all the mysteries of the universe. It was like the great Tao of the underworld, causing any living being to feel as if they were in contact with a supreme existence the moment they came into contact with this light. However, this feeling did not make them feel satisfied at all. Instead, it was the exact opposite. It made them feel extreme emptiness, and it made them feel as if they'd reached the highest peak that they could ever dream of. After that, no matter which direction they went, they would be in an emptiness where there was nowhere to go. This emptiness could be said to have arrived at the state of despair for those that lacked willpower. At this moment, countless living beings were unable to endure this despair, and they directly used all sorts of methods to end their lives while being enveloped by the light, and they used suicide to avoid this extreme despair. Of course, there were naturally no connate golden immortal realm cultivators amongst these living beings that ended their lives. After cultivating for 2 million years, any connate golden immortal realm cultivator would have improved tremendously, and they were vastly different from before. For example, the Sky Maiden had broken through to the peak of the 8th order of the immortal realm. She'd attained a fundamental breakthrough upon stepping foot into the 9th order of the immortal realm. As for the martial monarch, even though he hadn't attained a fundamental breakthrough, he'd improved his cultivation to the peak of the 9th order of the immortal realm, and he was only a step away from breaking through. Because he'd cultivated his own martial Tao, his strength far surpassed ordinary peak ninth order of the immortal realm. He'd arrived at a state where he could easily crush a few dozen or even a few hundred ordinary peak ninth order of the immortal realm. However, he still couldn't compare to the Exterminator. Surpassing the ninth order of the immortal realm and the Exterminator weren't the same. The difference between them was the essence of life and the difference in cultivation. No matter how strong one's strength was, it was impossible to step foot into the Exterminator realm without comprehending the true meaning of extermination. It was impossible for cultivators that surpassed the ninth order of the immortal realm to compare to the Exterminator unless they possessed a strength that surpassed the ninth order of the immortal realm by thousands of times. Besides the two of them, the other connate golden immortal realm cultivators' improvements weren't weak as well. However, even the strongest amongst them, Daoist Skyfire, was only an ordinary peak ninth order of the immortal realm, and he was unable to exert strength that surpassed the ninth order of the immortal realm. Most of the others were only equivalent to the ninth order of the immortal realm, and the weakest were at the peak of the eighth order of the immortal realm. All in all, they'd undergone tremendous changes compared to before they'd stepped foot onto the bridge of the eras, and they'd improved by countless times. The reason why they'd improved so much was very simple. It was due to the various comprehensions they'd gained in the trials over the years, coupled with the invisible ripples produced by Luo Fan's cultivation. They'd traversed the thousands of trials together with Luo Fan. Although they didn't obtain the greatest or final benefit from the trials, they'd traversed different trials, seen different forbidden grounds, and witnessed different powers and laws. Naturally, it had an extremely strong impact on their wills. Perhaps one or two of them wouldn't be able to tell, but as they accumulated, it would naturally greatly benefit the improvement of their cultivation realm. Apart from that, the most important thing was the invisible ripples produced by Luo Fan's cultivation. Those ripples were formed when an existence at the half-step void comprehension realm intended to step into the true void comprehension realm. The principles and profundities contained within it were naturally between the half-step void comprehension realm and the true void comprehension realm. They weren't the true intent of void comprehension, yet they were much more profound than the true intent of perishment. However, they were only a level higher than the comprehension ability of connate golden immortal realm cultivators. On the whole, they'd surpassed the limits of comprehension of connate golden immortal realm cultivators, but there were still many profundities they were barely able to sense. On the other hand, it was precisely these profundities that hadn't exceeded the limits of their comprehension and were profundities they were barely able to sense, yet it was already sufficient for them to obtain unimaginable benefits and break through the shackles of their cultivation realm, allowing them to obtain an enormous breakthrough. After they obtained a breakthrough in their cultivation realm, these connate golden immortal realm cultivators naturally wouldn't hold back. Not a single one of them stayed on the spot, and all of them continued towards the center of the river. Chapter 890. Such an improvement allowed their bodies and minds to be in a peak state. Such a peak state allowed them to far surpass ordinary living beings, and it allowed them to maintain their sense of self while Luo Fan's breakthrough felt as if the Grand Tao had descended upon them. It allowed them to not be able to maintain their clarity because they were unable to find a direction to move forward or a goal to strive for. Fortunately, the shapeless and immaterial light that was produced at the instant Luo Fan's breakthrough only lasted for a few breaths of time. After a few breaths of time, all the light was completely withdrawn, and the entire space-time and the entire galaxy returned to normal. Everything seemed to be the same as before, and it was as if nothing had happened. However, all the connate Grand Luo realm cultivators, and even all the living beings in the entire space-time and the entire galaxy were clearly aware that the situation was completely different from a few breaths of time ago. The calm and tranquil scene from a few breaths of time ago could no longer appear in their world. This light is coming from the deepest part of the galaxy. Looks like it's coming from fellow Taoist Luo Fan. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Luo Fan to obtain such a breakthrough in just 2 million years. All the connate Grand Luo realm cultivators thought for a moment before they roughly understood where the light came from. As for the period of 2 million years, it wasn't something that these Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators experienced. Instead, they deduced it through the flow of time that they were in and the flow of time at the center of the galaxy that Luo Fan had mentioned. In fact, it was 2 million years to Luo Fan. Compared to the giant God-era projection in the outside world, it was less than a year. Even Empyrean, who had endured the fastest flow of time, had only experienced 200,000 years, or almost 300,000 years. For the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, the time was even shorter, and most of them only experienced less than 100,000 years. However, such a period of time could only be considered as a period of time that could barely be taken seriously for Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators like them. While these Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators were shocked, Luo Fan was currently enjoying the indescribably wonderful feeling. He had truly stepped into the void comprehension realm. The world that he saw, the world that he sensed, his body and his strength, his divine soul, and even his will had undergone earth-shattering changes. It was as if everything in the universe no longer had any secrets in his eyes. It was as if he had obtained all the truths and the mysteries of the universe. The emptiness brought about by this feeling did not make him feel any despair. Instead, he felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. He wasn't a Khanate golden immortal realm cultivator, nor was he an ordinary living being. This feeling of emptiness was something he had already anticipated when he had 1 foot in the void comprehending realm. When he first understood what the emptiness realm was, he already had his guesses, knowing that this feeling was something he had to go through, something that was bound to happen when he had just stepped into the void comprehending realm. It also represented that he had truly stepped into the realm of void comprehension. Naturally, he would not feel despair because of this, nor would he have any negative emotions. There could only be satisfaction on the surface that was the opposite of this emptiness. With a slight thought, the power in Luo Fan's body trembled and instantly rose in an unimaginable manner. In the blink of an eye, it had risen to several hundred times its original strength. The power in Luo Fan's body was already several thousand times stronger than his normal entering death realm. At this moment, it had risen by several hundred times. He was already hundreds of thousands of times stronger than a normal entering death realm cultivator. The extent of such an increase in power was so great that even if every increase in cultivation realm represented the peak of endless power, it was still an earth-shattering increase that almost surpassed the truth. It could be said that right now, Luo Fan, if he met the opponents in the forbidden ground of 5 elements, and if he met the strongest person in the thousands of trials, he could easily crush them with a single thought. He could easily crush them with just a single thought, completely ignoring their endless power that had completely fused with the forbidden land. The increase in power in his body was naturally not the only change after Luo Fan's breakthrough. At this moment, his senses, his soul, his will, and even his body had improved at an unbelievable rate due to the increase in cultivation realm. The power that was several hundred times stronger than before did not cause him any pressure after his body had been upgraded. His body still easily accommodated all of this power. Apart from that, his will, his senses, and his soul also easily and perfectly controlled this power, controlling this body that had improved by who knows how many times. Although Luo Fan had obtained shocking breakthrough, his aura did not leak even the slightest bit, apart from the aura around him being different from before. If it was a creature with a slightly slower perception of aura, it would definitely not notice that he had undergone a huge change at this moment. Luo Fan turned his eyes and looked into space. His eyes instantly saw through the entire galaxy in the space-time. He saw through all the stars and planets in this galaxy. He saw through all the rules and laws in this space-time. He directly saw through all the profound mysteries contained in it. Then, with a turn of his eyes, his gaze instantly pierced through the barriers of this space-time and directly saw the projection of the age of giant gods outside this space-time. The moment he saw the projection of the age of giant gods, endless information emerged out of nowhere from the depths of his mind and will. This information was none other than the various mysteries of the projection of the age of giant gods, the principles of various rules and principles, and even the endless information left behind by the age of giant gods in the past. The level of detail of this information was more than 10 million times better than when he had swept a glance at the projection of the age of giant gods 2 million years ago. In just an instant, he saw through the endless mysteries that belonged to the projection of the age of giant gods. During this process, time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, another 10,000 years had passed. These 10,000 years, compared to the outside world, but it was only a day. In these 10,000 years, Luo Fan had been using the superpower that he had obtained after breaking through to the half-step void enlightenment realm to carefully observe and understand the mysteries of the projection of the age of giant gods. On this day, after 10,000 years, he suddenly felt that his understanding of the entire projection of the age of giant gods had reached the point of exhaustion. He vaguely felt that the entire age of giant gods was like the space-time that he had opened up in front of him. There were no longer any secrets from him, and he could see straight into nothingness at a glance. With such a harvest, Luo Fan's eyes flashed. This was the entire space-time that he had opened up. The space-time that he had originally thought to be perfect was already riddled with holes in his eyes, with countless omissions and mistakes, and countless spaces for improvement. This space-time was originally opened up after he had comprehended the projection of the age of giant gods. The foundation was naturally based on the projection of the age of giant gods, and based on his understanding of the projection of the age of giant gods. Under such circumstances, his understanding of the projection of the age of giant gods had undergone an earth-shattering change, and naturally, his understanding of the construction of space-time had undergone an earth-shattering change. And this change allowed him to have a more perfect idea of this space-time. Comparing these ideas with his previous approach, he could naturally see how many omissions there were in his original approach. However, although the space-time was already riddled with holes in his eyes, Luo Fan did not have the idea of changing it. He opened up this space-time. The most important reason was to give himself enough time to break through to the half-step void enlightenment realm. At this time, he had completely become a void enlightener, and this most important goal had long been achieved, so the use of this space-time was naturally completed. Under such circumstances, the reason why this space-time still existed was that he was too lazy to destroy it. Why would he waste his energy to refine a space-time that did not need to exist? The projection of this era is indeed completely different from the projection of the first one-third of the checkpoints, thought Luo Fan as he looked at the various things in the space-time. After observing and comprehending the projection of the age of giant gods for 10,000 years, Luo Fan even thought that his understanding of the age of giant gods had reached the limit that he could reach. But in the end, he still could not find the core of this projection. He still could not find the traces and clues left by the core of the projection that could only be seen at a glance. It was as if this projection did not have a core at all. Such a change made him feel very troubled. He also felt a little excited. There was an indescribable fighting spirit in his heart. Although he could not see the core of this projection, even after careful observation, he was not the slightest bit discouraged, because he knew that this was the only way. If one could discover the core of this projection at a glance and easily destroy it as long as they stepped into the void enlightenment realm, then how could this path of Tao integration or transcendence allow the void enlightener to improve? How could it allow the void enlightener to improve? At this moment, he could not feel the core that must exist at all. This meant that his comprehension and observation of the projection of the age of giant gods had not completely exhausted the mysteries of the projection of the age of giant gods. This meant that he still needed to make further progress in his search before he could find the existence of the projection of the age of giant gods. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan could not help but sigh again. The projection of the entire age of giant gods was completely set up for existences above the void enlightenment realm. For such checkpoints, the role of those Khanate Grand Luo cultivators was equivalent to nothing. To put it bluntly, they were equivalent to playing a supporting role. They could only see the projection of this era, but it would be difficult for them to gain any additional gains, let alone be of any help in clearing the checkpoints. It could even be predicted that in the next 3,000 checkpoints, the role of these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators would not exceed their role in the projection of the age of giant gods. How could Luo Fan not sigh? As soon as this thought arose in his mind, the entire space-time began to change slightly. An indescribable power enveloped all the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators in the entire river system. Then, he said, "I have something to discuss with all of you. I apologize for offending you." As he spoke, he pulled slightly, and the power allowed the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators to traverse tens of thousands of light years in the void and directly arrive on this continent. This continent had experienced 2 million years of development. It had also been enveloped by the invisible ripples when Luo Fan broke through. At this moment, it had already developed into an extremely prosperous civilization. However, because this continent was only tens of thousands of kilometers in circumference, it was not considered large. Therefore, the number of living beings that lived on it was only average. However, under such circumstances, there were already some pure Yang realm living beings among them. In fact, most of the living beings had even attained the longevity realm and surpassed the limits of the samsara realm. Because these living beings were born and bred on this continent, they had completely adapted to the flow of time in this place. The pressure from the flow of time that was 365 million times faster than normal was equivalent to them not existing at all. It was as if they did not exist at all. They lived on this continent like ordinary creatures living in normal space-time. There were no abnormalities at all. Of course, this did not mean that they were stronger than the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators, nor did it mean that they could compare to Luo Fan. In fact, although they could withstand the pressure from the flow of time that was 365 million times faster than normal, they could only withstand the flow of time that was 365 million times faster than normal. In other places, the lower the flow of time that was 365 million times faster than normal, the more they would suffer from the reverse pressure. Perhaps even the strongest pure Yang realm living beings would explode because they could not withstand the reverse pressure when the flow of time was 649,000 times slower than normal. They would be reduced to dust. It was even more so for other places where the flow of time was normal. Even the Sky Maiden would not be able to withstand the flow of time on such a continent. However, at this very moment, with the wondrous power that Luo Fan had unleashed, these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators did not have to withstand the immense pressure from the rapid flow of time at all. To them, the pressure was as if it did not exist at all. It was completely isolated and did not affect them at all. The Khanate Grand Luo cultivators were originally immersed in their cultivation. In Luo Fan's senses, it had been 10,000 years since his breakthrough, but in reality, only a few hundred years had passed at most for these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators. They were still immersed in the aftermath of the formless light that Luo Fan's breakthrough had produced. Almost everyone was trying their best to recall and comprehend the mysteries of that light. It was naturally a rather slim process that was almost impossible to gain anything from, but if they did gain anything, it would be an astonishing gain. It was a gain that had an endless effect on their cultivation and breakthroughs. Under such circumstances, they were enveloped by Luo Fan's power. When they heard Luo Fan's words again, they could not react at all. When they wanted to figure out what was going on, they realized that the void had changed, and they had actually arrived at a completely unfamiliar continent in the blink of an eye. The pressure that had been suppressing them for tens of thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years due to the increase in the flow of time had completely disappeared. It was as if they had instantly returned to normal space-time. Such a feeling instantly made everyone feel as if they had been separated from a lifetime. They looked around, And when they clearly saw the ecological landscape on this continent that was completely different from any other continent they had seen before, they instantly dispelled the thought that they had returned to normal space-time. The Martial Emperor's senses became even sharper. He raised his head and looked up. He saw the boundless starry sky above the continent, and he could faintly see many stars that he had passed by in the past. With just a slight thought, he knew exactly where they were. After he knew where they were, the words that he suddenly heard earlier were instantly understood by him, and a faint smile appeared on his face. So this is the place where the flow of time is 3,650,000 times faster than normal. It looks like it's no different from other places. Such a thought flashed in the Martial Emperor's mind. Along with the Martial Emperor coming to an understanding, the other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators came to an understanding successively as well, and all of them had different expressions on their faces. Perhaps it was admiration, bewilderment, curiosity, shock, and so on and so forth. There was no end to it. Right at this moment, Luo Fan's figure appeared before all the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators, and he said, "I took the liberty of inviting all of you here because I have an important matter to discuss with all of you. I have no choice but to do this, and I hope all of you won't blame me." "What are you talking about, fellow Taoist Luo Fan? We can't be happier to be able to witness the scenery at the center of this space-time. So why would we blame you?" Taoist Heavenfire chuckled. The other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators nodded in agreement, and they expressed that Taoist Heavenfire's words made sense and that Luo Fan was worrying too much. Of course, the Martial Emperor and Sky Maiden weren't amongst these people that agreed with him. Both of them had a different relationship with Luo Fan, so they naturally didn't have to be cautious like the other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators. Luo Fan naturally didn't have the mood to exchange pleasantries with them. After he expressed a slight apology, he slowly raised his head, and his gaze seemed to have penetrated through countless layers of space to look towards an extremely deep and distant place. He saw some sort of supreme existence that existed there. His actions caused the aura on his body to change naturally, and it caused all the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators present here to instantly feel a solemn atmosphere arise spontaneously, and it seemed as if even the air in the surroundings had frozen slightly. In their daze, all of them understood that what Luo Fan was about to say was definitely something of great importance, and it was even sufficient to overturn all their ideas. Chapter 891. What Luo Fan wanted to see wasn't anything else. It was exactly as he guessed, the supreme being that was looking down at everything that happened on the path of Tao integration or transcendence. However, it was very obvious that if he could see that supreme being so easily, then why would he guess? He would be able to confirm the existence of that supreme being. However, even though he couldn't see the existence of that supreme being, it didn't make much difference to Luo Fan whether he could see it or not. The reason he was looking up at that supreme place wasn't because he wanted to meet that supreme being face to face. Instead, it was because of the change in his emotions, and it could be said to be an instinctive action. The reason was none other than the fact that what he was about to say next was something that was extremely important to all the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators and himself. To Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators, it was a great guidance to the improvement of their cultivation. On the other hand, to Luo Fan, it was a test of that supreme being. It was a test that could easily cause one's death and soul to disperse. After looking for a while, Luo Fan slowly lowered his head. He looked at the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators in front of him and spoke with a rather calm expression. "I believe all of you have sensed that the difficulty of the 9,999 barriers is increasing continuously. Now, or rather, starting from thousands of checkpoints, the matter of clearing the checkpoints has already exceeded the limits of the abilities of fellow Taoists." Luo Fan's words were rather direct, and he didn't beat around the bush at all. It could be said to be extremely unpleasant to the ears. However, all the Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators present knew their limits, and they wouldn't allow their emotions to affect their rationality. Although their expressions slightly changed, They knew that Luo Fan had not finished his words. The evaluation of their strength was obviously not the main point that he wanted to say. Moreover, they knew that what Luo Fan said was the truth. It was true that they were already unable to clear the barriers thousands of times ago, or rather, since the 3,334th barrier began. It could even be said that he had made no contribution at all. This kind of understanding made them not dare to face Luo Fan's almost accusatory words with confidence. Thus, after Luo Fan finished speaking, the expressions of all the golden immortals present here changed slightly, but the scene still remained as it was before this, and there wasn't much change. Moreover, no one refuted Luo Fan. Luo Fan already knew this would happen. He wasn't surprised by this and continued, I had absolute confidence that I could pass the previous test, so I didn't tell you about it. However, the following checkpoints were many times more difficult than the previous ones. Even I didn't have the confidence to pass them. Furthermore, I don't have the confidence to completely protect all of you from harm. However, I have no choice but to share it with all of you. Fellow Taoist Luo Fan, feel free to come. Taoist Heavenfire's cultivation realm was only inferior to the martial monarch realm amongst the numerous Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators, and he was much stronger than the cheating Sky Maiden. Naturally, he had the qualifications to speak on behalf of all the other Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators besides the martial monarch. As for the martial monarch, his relationship with Luo Fan was very different, but he didn't need to speak on his behalf at this moment. Taoist Heavenfire and the other Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators felt extremely complicated in their hearts. There was anger, desolation, shame, humiliation, and fighting spirit. However, no matter how complicated his feelings were, he had to express something and speak up. When Luo Fan heard Taoist Heavenfire's words, he nodded and said, I'm not saying all of this to humiliate all of you. It's just that I see that all of you can't see the path ahead clearly, so I intend to take the liberty of explaining the path of cultivation to all of you. Luo Fan didn't say it directly, but all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators understood what he meant. Judging from his words, Luo Fan was clearly worried that they were too arrogant and confident. They thought that their path of cultivation was completely correct and that outsiders couldn't criticize it. That way, they would treat what he was about to say about the path of cultivation as passing wind. Therefore, from the very beginning, he made them realize how bad the situation they were going to face was. He made them realize how big of a gap there was between their own strength and their own cultivation. Only then would they remember what he said next in their hearts. When they understood all of this, the resentment in the hearts of these cultivators finally vanished completely. Since they were able to cultivate to the Khanate grand heavenly realm, they were naturally not narrow-minded people. Even if their personalities were different or even worlds apart, there was no difference in their understanding of how to improve their strength. With such a mentality, no matter what their personality was, they would be able to be endlessly tolerant towards things that could help them improve their cultivation realm and help them improve their cultivation. Not to mention that Luo Fan was merely speaking of the truth that they weren't willing to speak of, even if Luo Fan directly humiliated them. So long as it allowed them to obtain benefits from their cultivation, then they would suppress the rage that came from the humiliation. At the very least, they would wait until they obtained all the benefits before flaring up. Along with the changes in the emotions of all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators, the atmosphere that seemed like a storm was about to descend and was enveloped by boundless rage had vanished completely. It was like nothing had occurred, and it was exactly the same as before Luo Fan spoke those words. Luo Fan nodded slightly when he saw all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators acting like this. However, his expression didn't change at all, and he said indifferently, since the ancient times, the realms before the Saint Realm have been divided into 5 parts. The first part is before the Immortality Realm. For Golden Core Realm cultivators, it's the mortal realm before attaining the Golden Core Realm. The second part is the Immortality Realm. For Golden Core Realm cultivators, it's the existence of attaining the Golden Core Realm. The third part is the pure yang realm, and it's corresponding to the Khanate grand heavenly realm of the Golden Core realm. The fourth part is the perfection realm, and it's corresponding to the Khanate grand heavenly realm of the Golden Core realm. On the other hand, the fifth part is the transcendence realm. For Golden Core realm cultivators, this realm is equivalent to surpassing the Khanate grand heavenly realm. Luo Fan didn't have any intention to waste any time. After he'd laid the groundwork for the Khanate grand heavenly realm, he couldn't be bothered to change the topic with pleasantries, and he directly started speaking about what he wanted to say. The expressions of all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators turned solemn when they heard what Luo Fan said. What Luo Fan spoke about wasn't much of a secret to all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators present here. Every single one of them was at least at the fourth realm of the five realms before the Saint realm, and there were even martial emperors amongst them that had attained the fifth realm. Under such circumstances, what Luo Fan spoke about was merely a summary of their past of cultivation. However, it was such an extremely simple summary that allowed them to sense the depth of Luo Fan's thoughts, and it allowed them to understand how deep Luo Fan's understanding of the path of cultivation was. With such an understanding, they naturally looked forward to what Luo Fan was going to say next. How could they neglect it just because it wasn't much of a secret? Luo Fan paid no attention to the changes in their expressions, and he continued. Since the ancient times, there have been countless specific subdivisions towards the first four parts, and I presume all of you aren't unfamiliar with it. So, I won't speak about it any further here. What I'm going to talk about today is the fifth part. What exactly is the realm that surpasses the perfection realm? As soon as Luo Fan finished speaking, in an instant, the eyes of all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators present here lit up, and it was even to the extent that some of them were even unable to control their own auras and strength. Their bodies trembled, and as the aura around them surged, it caused a violent whirlwind to appear in the surroundings. The originally calm and tranquil scene here instantly vanished without a trace. Towards the first four realms, any single one of the numerous Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators present here was able to speak of thousands of specific methods to divide realms, but not a single one of them dared say that they completely understood the fifth realm. Even the martial emperors who faintly and vaguely sensed it didn't dare. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan spoke so casually about exactly what the fifth realm was about. So how could they not be shocked? How could they not be unable to control themselves? Even though it was merely a description of realms, to these Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators, this description of realms was already boundlessly beneficial to them. After all, these Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators were existences that had cultivated for a few billion years at least. Their natural endowments and comprehension abilities were extremely shocking existences. The reason they were unable to break through at their current realms was because of fortuitous encounters. It was mostly because they didn't have a clear understanding of the path of cultivation, and they didn't know where they should break through or what sort of path lay ahead of them. If they were able to find out exactly what the path of the fifth realm was like, then even if it was just a name, it would be an extremely huge hint to them. It was also a huge hint that could lead them to the right path. It was easy to imagine how great the benefits would be for them. Luo Fan still paid no attention to the changes in their expressions, and he continued, in the fifth realm above the Khanate grand heavenly realm, there are 5 minor realms. Even though they're minor realms, the span of any one of them is extremely huge, and it's even greater than the span of all the other 4 realms combined. The difficulty of crossing these realms is extremely difficult as well. It's absolutely not easier than cultivating from an ordinary person to the peak of the Khanate grand heavenly realm. As soon as these words left his mouth, only shock remained on the faces of all the Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivators. At this moment, Luo Fan wasn't as indifferent as before. Instead, he paid attention to the surroundings, and he paid attention to everything that existed indistinctly. He wanted to find the traces of that supreme existence that might appear. That existence might or might not know what I've said, but they're all extremely deeply hidden secrets of this universe. If that existence is observing me, his emotions will definitely change because I've said all this, and if the situation is good, he might reveal some traces for me to sense. Such thoughts flashed through his mind. However, it was a pity that although he was paying attention to all the changes in his surroundings, he did not sense any traces that might belong to that supreme existence at all. It was as if he could not sense any traces or clues of the core existence of the age of giant God's projection at all. Although Luo Fan was a little disappointed by this, it was still within his expectations. Therefore, his expression did not change at all. That mighty being was able to open up the path of convergence or the path of transcendence. So the power of his divine ability was not something that Luo Fan could imagine. Even if his mood changed and he revealed some traces of his existence, it was very likely that Luo Fan would not be able to detect it. Since he had gained nothing, Luo Fan continued. These 5 minor realms are the Perishment Realm, the Void Comprehension Realm, the Tao Integration Realm, the Transcendent Realm, and the Death Realm. Tao Master Realm. Entering Annihilation, Void Comprehension, Tao Integration, Transcendence, Tao Sovereign. Everyone's eyes lit up when they heard Luo Fan's words. They muttered to themselves. Among them, the one whose eyes shone the brightest was none other than the others. Moreover, it was a martial emperor whose strength had already surpassed the first heaven realm. After all, with his current strength as a martial emperor, he could already vaguely sense that there was still a realm above him. He could even faintly sense the characteristics of that realm. Under such circumstances, when he heard Luo Fan use such concise words to summarize the realm, it was as if the fog that shrouded him had been lifted, making him feel as if there was a bright light in front of him. He finally understood where he was heading in the future. Of course, that was all. The distance between surpassing the grand immortal realm and entering the annihilation realm was even greater than the distance between the mortal realm and the peak of the grand immortal realm. How could it be something that could be crossed just by hearing a name? The fact that the martial monarch was able to understand the direction he was heading in showed that he had accumulated a lot of experience. Apart from the martial emperor, the eyes of the other Khanate grand heavenly immortal realm cultivators lit up, and they etched the names of the 5 realms into the depths of their memories. However, there was still a hint of confusion in their eyes. After all, among them, even the strongest among them was only equivalent to the peak of the grand immortal realm. They couldn't even break through to the grand immortal realm, and they were still too far away from the first of the 5 realms. How could they possibly have much understanding toward the 5 realms? It was normal for them to be confused. I've just attained the Void Comprehending Realm, and there's still a long way to go before I reach the peak of the Void Comprehending Realm, let alone the Tao Integration Realm, Transcendence Realm, and Tao Paragon Realm. Luo Fan sensed the surroundings carefully, but he still couldn't sense any traces of the Almighty. He sighed lightly and said, "The expressions of the other Khanate grand heavenly immortal realm cultivators changed slightly when they heard Luo Fan's words. They were shocked by Luo Fan's strength, and they were also in disbelief by the gap of the 5 realms. They were shocked by the fact that Luo Fan was only on par with them in the past. Moreover, he was only one of the weaker ones. However, at this moment, he was already 2 to 3 realms stronger than them, and he could even easily crush them. What they found unbelievable was that at this moment, Luo Fan, who could easily crush them with his thoughts, was only in the 2nd realm of the 5 realms. Not only that, but he had also just broken through. He had yet to reach the peak of this realm. From this, one could see how huge the gap between the 5 realms was, and they could imagine how far away they were from becoming saints. In the history of the Earth's universe for hundreds of millions of years, these Khanate grand heavenly immortal realm cultivators knew that as long as one became an Khanate grand heavenly immortal realm, one would have the qualifications to pursue becoming a saint. This was because the cultivation realms in the past were above the Khanate grand heavenly immortal realm, and then the primordial heavenly immortal realm. Although these connate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm cultivators knew that they were still far away from becoming a chaotic prime and a true saint, they had a vague feeling that they were not far away from becoming a saint due to their insufficient understanding of realms. They even had a feeling that they would be able to quickly cross the gap between connate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm and saint once the opportunity to become a saint arrived. However, it was only at this moment that they understood that this feeling was merely a misconception. The gap between a saint and incarnate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm was like the distance between heaven and earth. It could even be said that only those who had broken through the connate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm and stepped into the five realms would be considered to have truly stepped onto the threshold of becoming a saint. Without breaking through to the connate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm, one would not be able to grab hold of the opportunity to become a saint even if it was right before their eyes. They could only sit and watch as the opportunity passed by before their eyes. It's no wonder that only a few legends of the sages have been passed down for trillions of years. It turns out that the path of cultivation has been missing the most important link. Old Man Tong, Shao heaved a long sigh. There was a look of despair in his eyes. The more he knew, the more he understood how difficult it was. Old Man Tong Shao was known to know everything. He naturally had a much greater understanding of the history of the Earth's universe compared to other living beings. However, he could vaguely tell how long it had been before the Dharma-ending era, and he knew that the Earth's universe had gone through an unimaginable amount of time. Under such conditions, he could imagine how many outstanding cultivators there were throughout the endless years, and he knew how many people who had shocking opportunities existed. However, only a few legends of the saints have been passed down throughout the endless years. In the past, he had thought that it was because too much time had passed and that many legends of the saints had been lost in the endless passage of time. However, at this moment, he understood that perhaps in the endless years of the universe on Earth, there had only been a few saints among the countless cultivators with shocking talents. Chapter 892. Luo Fan noticed the changes in everyone's expressions, yet his expression was indifferent and calm. He didn't say anything and just waited silently. As for what he was waiting for, he was clearly aware that the other golden immortal realm cultivators present here would gradually come to an understanding as well. After a long time, those golden immortal realm cultivators finally recovered from their shock, and the complicated expression in their eyes gradually vanished. Even Old Man Tong, Shao had recovered from his state of despair. Just as Luo Fan had expected, these golden immortal realm cultivators weren't ignorant. After they recovered from their shock, they understood the true reason Luo Fan told them these cultivation secrets, and they understood exactly what Luo Fan was waiting for. The martial emperor sighed and said, "I've gained great comprehension after listening to Brother Luo, and I don't have the mood to continue challenging the domain. In any case, my strength is equivalent to nothing to Brother Luo. Why don't Brother Luo find a place for me to enter into closed-door cultivation while you challenge the domain?" This was exactly what Luo Fan was waiting for, and he naturally nodded slightly when he heard the martial emperor. As soon as the martial emperor finished speaking, the other golden immortal realm cultivators naturally wouldn't hold back, and they spoke successively. Some found some excuses like comprehending something in their hearts. Some directly said that they would only be a hindrance if they continued to participate in the domain, and they requested Luo Fan to find a place for them to enter into closed-door cultivation. In this regard, Luo Fan nodded in agreement, as if he was dealing with a martial monarch. Since they'd already agreed, Luo Fan didn't hesitate and said to the other golden immortal realm cultivators, "Even though this space is formed from the projection of the giant god era, I'm able to extract it and carry it with me. However, in this way, it's impossible for the flow of light to attain such a swift state. At most, it can only reach 3,650 times the speed of the outside world. I presume such a speed of time isn't pressuring to all of you, so why don't all of you cultivate here?" This was the center of this space, and it could be said that the essence of the entire space and river were gathered here. For cultivators cultivating here, the amount of vitality was secondary. What was more important was that this continent reflected the mysteries of the entire space-time. It could allow them to constantly sense this space and time during the process of cultivation. It would allow their minds to be endlessly tempered. It would naturally bring endless benefits to the increase of their cultivation. To be able to cultivate here, even if the flow of time was the same as the outside world, it was still a shocking joy for them. Not to mention that the flow of time was 3,650 times faster. What did they have to be dissatisfied with? At that moment, the numerous connate, grand, heavenly realm cultivators naturally expressed their gratitude to Luo Fan. Luo Fan smiled and said, "Then please cultivate here. In the future, if any of you become an extermination cultivator, please participate in the journey again." Of course, anyone would say something like that. Luo Fan smiled and nodded towards the martial monarch. After expressing his apologies, he took a step forward. He immediately left this space-time. After leaving the space-time, he arrived at the same place where he first stepped into the projection of the age of the giant gods. It was still the boundless starry sky around him. It looked no different from before, and that was to be expected. Luo Fan had stayed in that space-time for more than 2 million years, but because of the difference in the flow of time of 365 million times, this period of time was only a few months compared to the projection of the Age of Giants, or even less than a year. Compared to the entire era, such a time was no different from an instant. How could the surrounding boundless starry sky change because of that? After appearing in the projection of the Age of the Giant Gods, he turned around and grabbed at the void. It had already fused into the void. The speck of dust that represented that river and that space-time that had completely disappeared reappeared before him. He raised his hand and pointed at the speck of dust. Endless mysterious light gathered from all directions. In the blink of an eye, a strange copper mirror was woven around the speck of dust, and the speck of dust was firmly wrapped in it. The copper mirror was extremely simple and exquisite. It looked no different from a real copper mirror. It was impossible to tell that it was condensed from countless mysterious light, and there was not a trace of illusion. After the copper mirror appeared, the entire universe trembled slightly, and the surrounding space-time was slightly distorted, as if something extremely important was being separated. The tremors lasted for a while before subsiding. During this process, Luo Fan vaguely felt that there was something that he had not discovered when he carefully observed the projection of the age of the giant gods before. It seemed to be an existence that was hidden deeper than the age of the giant gods seemed to have been startled. However, he waited until all the changes subsided, but still did not feel that the existence that seemed to have been startled really cast its gaze or anything else over. It was like a sleeping lion that had been bitten by a mosquito. It just waved its claws casually to stop the mosquito from biting itself, but it would not wake up because of that. Seeing this, Luo Fan was a little disappointed, but he was more satisfied. This space-time originally belonged to the age of the giant gods, although it had been changed and refined by him to form its own entity, and the vastness of its interior was far from comparable to the space-time that had been originally separated. But it still belonged to the projection of the age of the giant gods after all. At this moment, being separated was equivalent to cutting off a piece of meat from the age of the giant gods. It would naturally cause a violent reaction from the age of the giant gods. And this reaction contained the existence that was hidden deeper than the age of the giant gods, which he had not discovered in the process of carefully comprehending the various secrets of the age of the giant gods. This surprised him, and this was also the source of his satisfaction. Since such a movement could trigger a reaction from that existence, then a bigger movement should be able to wake that existence up. And whether that existence was the core of the projection of the age of the giant gods or not, it definitely contained mysteries that he had not obtained before. Naturally, he would not let it go. In other words, through the changes just now, he had found a way to find deeper mysteries of the projection of the age of the giant gods, and he could not help but be satisfied. With a wave of his hand, the bronze mirror fell into Luo Fan's hand. Looking down, There was a vortex slowly rotating in the bronze mirror. The way it rotated was so mysterious that it seemed that every change in the vortex contained endless mysteries of the universe. This vortex was the river system. Every tiny speck of light was a star. This bronze mirror was made by Luo Fan, and the space-time was also opened by Luo Fan. Naturally, Luo Fan could see what was going on at a glance. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that the flow of time inside that space-time had naturally adjusted. The flow of time in the center had been reduced to 3,650 times the flow of time outside the projection of the age of the giant gods, which is 1,000 times different from the 3,650 times before. However, even with such a change, the original law of the flow of time in the river system had not changed. The outermost layer was the void outside the river system. The flow of time was still the same as the outside world, and as it got closer to the continent in the center of the river system, the flow of time was closer to 3,650 times. Because the change in the flow of time was a fundamental change in the entire space-time, it was not naturally endured by the living beings on the continent, who could not withstand the slow flow of time, and there would not be any abnormal changes due to the decrease in the flow of time. Apart from the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators, they could not feel the change in the flow of time at all. In their senses, the entire world did not change at all, and their lives did not change at all. In fact, even though the flow of time had slowed down so much, they were still unable to go too far away from the continent like before, and could not withstand the flow of time that was hundreds of times faster than the outside world. After the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators sensed the change in the flow of time around them, they knew that Luo Fan's actions had been completed, and they would be enjoying the path of secluded cultivation in this space-time for an unknown number of years. None of them hesitated. Even if they were feeling extremely complicated at the moment, they would not hesitate because of that. They each found an area on the continent where they could cultivate and opened up their own cave abodes. They each want to cultivate. Among them, the Martial Emperor and the Sky Maiden seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally opened up their cave abodes at a location that was closest to the cave where Luo Fan was. Luo Fan glanced at the various changes in the space-time, and after discovering that there were no surprises, he directly put the copper mirror into his world within sleeve. He did not care anymore. Now that they're no longer a burden, I should be able to move freely. Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. With a thought, he took a step forward and arrived before a huge star. The Age of Giant Gods was an era that existed before the Age of Dharma Decline. This era was 10 eras away from the Age of Dharma Decline, and its history had long been lost in the passage of time. Even Old Man Omniscient's understanding of this era was only a name at most, and it was not even comparable to what Luo Fan had gained by glancing at this era. The reason why this era was named was because there was a type of deity that existed in this era. It was an extremely huge and powerful deity. These deities were born in all sorts of strange places. Some were born in the void, some were born in planets, some were born in nebulae, and some were even born directly in stars. They were called heavenly deities by the living beings of this era, and they were also called giant deities. This was because their great power enveloped the entire universe, affecting everything in the universe, and changing the laws of the entire universe. That was why this era was called the Age of Giant Gods. The star that Luo Fan was facing was extremely huge, and it was even tens of millions of times larger than the sun. It hung in the void, and the light it emitted could be clearly seen from hundreds of thousands of light years away. A giant deity was hidden in that star, and it was the most powerful heavenly deity in the entire Age of Giant Gods, or in other words, the projection of the entire Age of Giant Gods. It was the being known as the Radiant Lord. This heavenly deity was born in that star, and possessed might comparable to Khanate Grand Luo cultivators as soon as he was born. It had been billions of years since he had matured, and the power of his divine abilities had grown to the level of peak Terminator. If he had been born on the star, the power of his divine abilities would have surpassed peak Terminator and reached the level of void comprehending. That was not the reason he was known to all. Instead, it was because he had spiritually wandered the universe over the billions of years of his life, leaving his footprints on countless living planets, his legends, and his faith. The heavenly deities of the age of giant gods were not like the gods of the later age of gods. They did not exist by relying on faith, but the existence of faith could still provide them with many benefits, which was why they naturally existed. Luo Fan looked at the star. At first glance, the star seemed very ordinary. Apart from being a little bigger, it was no different from the other stars in the void. However, if one looked closely, they would notice that every ray of light, every prominence, and every flow of heat on the star were visible. Every change in light and darkness was the result of countless designs, and one could even faintly see countless mysterious runes existing in their cores. The entire colossal star was like an immeasurably huge runic sphere, and within the star hid a powerful will that was extremely reserved, but could fill the entire universe once it was unleashed. Luo Fan smiled as he looked at the star. He could not be bothered to waste his breath. With a thought, he raised a finger, and a beam of profound radiance shot out from his hand. It condensed into an illusory seal in the void. As soon as the seal appeared, the surrounding void collapsed as if it could not withstand the seal's existence, producing countless spatial fragments. Rules and powder of rules lingered around the seal, causing a faint mist to appear around the seal, shrouding the void within a radius of several hundred kilometers. It seemed that this seal was surrounded by mist, which naturally formed a strange cluster of clouds. This seal was none other than Luo Fan forming it after upgrading and improving the light of destruction that he had developed back then with a thought. It was a combination of powers that contained the essence of destruction. Because Luo Fan was already a true void comprehender, the number of powers contained in this combination had far exceeded the original number, reaching tens of thousands of types. Clearly, it required so much energy to assemble, so the destructive power of this seal was naturally not ordinary. It was extremely powerful. It was more than 10,000 times more powerful than before. After the seal was formed, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He raised his hand and pressed down lightly, sending the seal flying towards the star in front of him. The seal was only the size of a fist when it first appeared. Even after destroying the surrounding void and rules and turning them into powder, it only affected a radius of several hundred kilometers. However, as it flew towards the star in front of him, its size increased at an unbelievable speed. In an instant, it had grown to an unimaginable size, even reaching the size of the star. Originally, the star was only the size of a speck of dust compared to the star. However, when it reached the surface of the star, the size of a seal was already the size of the star. With such a huge seal slamming down on the star, one could imagine how great the impact would be. As the seal grew larger, its illusory level did not change at all. It did not become more solid, nor did it become more illusory. It was as if it was not the seal that was changing, but the surrounding world. Even the void around the seal did not change in the slightest when compared to the seal. It was also tens of thousands of times larger than the seal. It directly enveloped the entire starry sky where the star was located. Even though the consciousness hidden within the star had been in a deep slumber before this, it had no choice but to wake up at this moment. In an instant, a powerful aura surged from the star. Countless strange runes began to shine on the entire star. Each of these strange runes was extremely complicated, and each of them contained endless mysteries. After they appeared, they began to condense in the void, forming a huge palm that could directly grasp the star. It kept breaking away from the surface of the star, looking as if it was extending directly from the star's inner core. Judging from a number of runes, it was obvious that the runes on the star that Luo Fan had seen before were not limited to the surface of the star. There were even more unimaginable runes within the star. This palm, that was formed from runes, was naturally facing the seal of destruction that Luo Fan had unleashed. After reaching out, it suddenly clenched the seal, wanting to grasp the incomparably huge seal of destruction that was comparable to the size of the entire star in the palm. This palm was no different from the palm of an ordinary person, or rather, the palm of an ordinary person with a born Taoism aptitude. Although it was formed from runes, it was clearly visible, and there was no illusion at all. It exuded an indestructible, almost indestructible aura. There was also an indescribable sense of power, as if the entire universe and the entire world could be crushed by this palm with a gentle grip. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face as he faced this palm. Chapter 893. With that thought, Luo Fan did not hold back at all. He raised his hand and pressed down gently. The seal shook violently and instantly shattered the huge hand that was holding it. The hand was formed from countless strange runes. Although it looked like it was made of flesh and blood, it turned into a cloud of golden light once it was shattered and instantly scattered in all directions. A furious roar suddenly came from the star. Following that, the entire starry sky shook violently. Two huge arms seeped out of the star and faced the huge seal. The two left arms were several times smaller than the huge hand from before, but they were still extremely huge. Although they were far inferior to the seal, they were still on the same level. In comparison, it was like the two arms of an ordinary person to a rock that was the size of two people. The speed of the two arms was unparalleled. Before the seal could shatter, the huge palm touched the seal before it could strike the star. A loud rumble erupted from the point of contact between the two palms and the seal. Along with this voice, there was also an endless shockwave. The strength of the shockwave had reached an unimaginable level. In an instant, the void within a radius of thousands of light years was completely annihilated, causing a large area of the void around the star to seem as if it was enveloped by a dense fog. After a long time, the various changes finally subsided, and the scene on the star reappeared. At that moment, the seal was barely caught by the two arms. It was like an extremely heavy mountain that pressed down on the two arms and the owner of the two arms. The star was no longer a star. Instead, it had been replaced by a huge figure. This figure had the appearance of a person with a natural Tao aptitude in a sacred robe. He looked no different from an ordinary living being. It was just that its gigantic body exuded an incomparably holy and majestic white light. Its expression was filled with boundless might. Obviously, this was the radiant lord of this giant god era, and also the most powerful giant god in the entire giant god era. At that moment, the Lord of Light raised his hands high to block the seal that was pressing down on him. His feet stepped on the void as if he was stepping on real flat ground. One could faintly see space ripples spreading out in all directions from where he stepped. "Who the hell are you? Why did you attack me?" The Lord of Light struggled to hold up the huge seal above him. He roared angrily. The voice was extremely grand, and when it entered Luo Fan's ears, it was as if the entire world was roaring at him. It made Luo Fan feel as if the entire world, the entire universe, and the entire era were pouring out their anger at him. As expected of the strongest giant god of this giant god era, Luo Fan sensed that his mind was constantly being attacked, and such a thought flashed through his mind. However, even though there was a boundless impact bombarding his mind, he was still unable to comprehend it. However, he had the powerful will of a void comprehending being, so he naturally could not be affected by this voice. Naturally, he could not change because of this. His expression was extremely calm as well. He said, "It's nothing. I just had a sudden impulse and wanted to vent." Such an answer would naturally not satisfy the Lord of Light, who had been high and mighty for billions of years. In fact, it would not satisfy any other living being. As a result, the Lord of Light let out an even more furious roar. His eyes shone brightly, and in an instant, the void within several light years was affected by his power, turning into a domain of light. The entire void no longer looked like it was in complete darkness. Instead, it was filled with white light that was filled with a sacred aura. In the void that was filled with light, Luo Fan felt an indescribable power wrap around him and lock onto him. It made him feel like he wanted to move his body and circulate his power. It would take thousands of times more effort than before to achieve that. Even the seal above the Lord of Light seemed to be affected by that incomparably powerful power. It seemed to have become a mosquito wrapped in resin, and there was a moment of delay. However, it was only a moment of delay. The seal was a seal that Luo Fan had formed by combining tens of thousands of different powers in order to unleash its destructive power. Its power was many times stronger than Luo Fan's own void, comprehending realm power. Although it would not be able to surpass the void comprehending realm and reach the path integration realm, it would definitely not be a problem for him to fully unleash all the power of the void comprehending realm when he reached the peak of the void comprehending realm. Although the Lord of Light was able to unleash the power of the emptiness realm from his current position, he was only able to unleash it. He was unable to unleash the full power of the emptiness realm. How could he possibly withstand the seal? With just a slight thought from Luo Fan, the seal instantly broke free from the powerful power that had locked onto him. With a loud bang, it crushed the hands of the giant god and pressed down on the head of the giant god. Before the Lord of Light could even let out a shriek, the seal had crushed his head into pieces. After that, the seal didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. It continued to press downwards, crushing the body of the Lord of Light. In an instant, the entire body of the Lord of Light turned into dust. The dust dispersed in all directions along with the shock waves produced by the seal. As the Radiant Lord's entire body was crushed into dust, the radiant domain that spanned several light years instantly collapsed and disappeared. The boundless white holy light disappeared without a trace in an instant, and the surrounding void returned to a pitch-black scene of nothingness. The power that had wrapped around Luo Fan also disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. "This is still not enough," said Luo Fan with a faint smile on his face. As he spoke, the seal did not stop at all and continued to press down. Below the seal, the star that had previously disappeared and seemed to have been hidden by the Lord of Light in another space-time reappeared. As the seal pressed down, it was aimed directly at the star. Clearly, it wanted to continue destroying the star. At this moment, the powerful will no longer existed in the star. However, Luo Fan could still sense that the traces of the Lord of Light's existence still existed. It was the projection of the most powerful giant god in the entire giant god era, the Lord of Light. It was still not completely gone. Hence, he was determined to completely destroy the star. With a loud rumble, the seal finally struck the star without any obstructions and smashed into it. It produced an earth-shattering noise that shook the entire Earth and the entire giant god era. Hundreds of locations that were originally hundreds of millions of light years apart in the Earth and the universe reacted violently at the same time. Those locations were none other than the locations where the powerful giant gods were born. It was as if the changes produced by the star could be linked to those locations and also cause some changes in those locations. The seal could unleash the power of the peak of the void comprehending realm and could push the power of destruction to the limit. Even the giant god, the Lord of Light, could not put up any resistance against the seal and was instantly turned into dust, let alone the star that could not put up any resistance at all. In an instant, the star collapsed with a loud bang. Countless flames and strange runes exploded in all directions, and the entire star was disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye. It seemed that it would soon disappear without a trace and turn into nothingness. However, the development of things was unexpected. Although the star was constantly collapsing and dissipating, it did not completely disappear. After all the flames and runes collapsed and disappeared, what remained in place was a strange light that seemed illusory and real. It was a strange ball of light that was the size of a normal planet, yet also illusory at the same time. This ball of light was extremely mysterious. Light and shadow circulated within it, as if there was an incomparably complete world existing within it. In that world, there were countless living beings of all shapes and sizes. It included almost all kinds of creatures that existed in this age of the giant gods. Among them, the most numerous were incredibly beautiful creatures with many pure white feathers on their backs. Luo Fan was extremely familiar with this kind of creature, or rather, he was extremely familiar with it from the legends that he had heard of. It looked exactly like the legendary angel. So this is God's kingdom. Luo Fan looked at the ball of light and suddenly understood what it was. He also understood why he felt that after the body of the Lord of Light was destroyed, the Lord of Light did not disappear and there were still traces of him. Naturally, it was because of the divine nation. This divine nation looked like a ball of light the size of a planet, but there was an infinitely vast space within it. Although it was not as vast as the universe, it was enough to accommodate millions of stars revolving freely within it. The scale of this divine nation was barely on the same order of magnitude as the space-time that Luo Fan had previously opened up. There were countless intelligent life forms that believed in the radiant God in the entire divine kingdom. Looking at their current appearance, it was obvious that the destruction of the Lord of Light's body by Luo Fan did not really cause their God to disappear. They were still praying for their God and still cursing Luo Fan, who was disrespectful to their God. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's eyes instantly shone through the divine nation, and he finally discovered the truth of the divine nation. So this is your true body. The body from before was actually just a clone. Luo Fan let out a long sigh and raised his hand to point at the seal. The seal fiercely blasted towards the divine nation. "Stop! Who are you? Why are you so ruthless?" At this moment, the Lord of Light's voice suddenly came from above the divine nation. Following that, a force that was even more powerful than the one in the realm of light suddenly acted on the seal. It tried its best to lock onto the seal and prevent it from continuing to blast downwards. "I've already said that I'm just venting," Luo Fan said calmly with a faint smile. As he spoke, his finger trembled slightly, and the seal suddenly shook. In an instant, the locking force that was many times more powerful than before collapsed, and it continued to blast towards the divine nation. "Angel Core, attack!" The Lord of Light roared when he saw this. As he roared, millions of angels rushed out from above the divine nation and turned into two torrents. One of them rushed towards the seal, while the other rushed towards Luo Fan. Each of these angels was thousands of feet tall, and Luo Fan was extremely small compared to them. However, even the strongest of these angels was only equivalent to a connate zenith heaven cultivator. Most of them were at the pure sun realm. The aura of the immortal realm was many times weaker than that of Luo Fan. In contrast, Luo Fan was much taller. On the other hand, their bodies that were thousands of times taller than Luo Fan seemed tiny. There were many of these angels, and they were not afraid of death. They shouted all sorts of slogans that praised the Lord of Light and cursed Luo Fan as they charged towards their respective targets. Needless to say, the angels that were charging towards the seal did not have much ability to resist the attack of the seal. He was directly crushed into powder, and his body and Tao vanished while his soul dispersed. As for the angels that were charging towards Luo Fan, they could not break through the faint aura that Luo Fan released around him. As soon as they got within 10,000 miles of Luo Fan, they were directly crushed into powder by the aura. Just like that, the two seemed to be completely useless, and they could not help the battle at all. They were just sending themselves to their deaths. However, there are just too many of them. Even if every angel was just sending themselves to their deaths, there are billions of angels sending themselves to their deaths without stopping. Without stopping, they collided with the seal and the aura that Luo Fan released. In the end, the seal slowed down a little, and Luo Fan gradually suffered some impact. At that moment, the holy nation trembled slightly. As it continuously spat out angels, it gradually became blurry, as if it was using some sort of method to move through the void and leave this place. Clearly, the Lord of Light did not pin his hopes on the angels being able to stop Luo Fan's attack. In order to defeat Luo Fan, he wanted the angels to create some time for him to escape. How ruthless! Luo Fan sighed. Luo Fan could not help but feel shaken by such decisiveness and ruthlessness. However, this did not mean that he would let the Lord of Light leave. With a thought, the seal trembled and the surrounding space shattered. Time instantly shattered. Due to the shattering of time, the seal could be said to have transcended time. With a sudden turn, it had already avoided the attack of the torrent of angels and arrived in another direction of the holy nation, where it suddenly imprinted itself on the holy nation. Countless mournful cries erupted from the torrent of angels and from the holy nation. These mournful cries were made by billions of living beings and angels within the holy nation, and they contained boundless terror and the most vicious curses. If ordinary living beings heard such mournful cries, their minds might even collapse the moment they heard them, and they would immediately become walking corpses. However, to an existence with a strong will like Luo Fan, these mournful cries and vicious curses were nothing. He only treated them as a gentle breeze that did not affect him at all. The moment the holy nation touched the seal, it suddenly paused, and the illusory changes completely disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the holy nation became solid, and it turned into a strange glass-like sphere. As soon as Luo Fan saw this sphere, he knew that this was the true appearance of the holy nation. The illusory appearance from before was obviously that the holy nation had already used most of the means to escape this place, and it had deliberately stopped. Seeing this, how could Luo Fan not understand that the Lord of Light had most likely already planned to move the holy nation when he first woke up? That body at the beginning was probably just an abandoned pawn that he had thrown out. If he had not acted so quickly and without any hesitation, he might have really escaped. After the strange glass-like sphere condensed, with the seal as the center, countless cracks gradually covered the inside and outside of the sphere, making the sphere look like it was pieced together by countless fragments. It seemed that with just a gentle breeze, it would directly collapse into countless pieces of powder. At this moment, the statues of the Lord of Light on the billions of planets in the projection of the age of giant gods in the entire universe were covered in countless cracks at the same time. Strangely, scarlet blood flowed out of the 7 orifices of the statues that were sculpted from various materials. Following that, the statues suddenly collapsed. Even the statues that were sculpted from the sturdiest materials turned into the finest powder and collapsed. At the same time, as the statues collapsed, all the believers of the Lord of Light that originally existed in the hearts of the believers of the Lord of Light also collapsed. In an instant, all the believers of the Lord of Light in the projection of the age of giant gods in the entire universe were filled with endless panic. They had already vaguely understood that their supreme god had most likely fallen. In front of Luo Fan, the strange sphere made of colored glass collapsed with a loud bang, turning into countless powder that dispersed in all directions. The billions of creatures in the holy nation did not have the slightest ability to resist, and they died at the same time as the holy nation turned into powder. The mournful screams and vicious curses were reduced by 90% as they died. Only the angels outside the holy nation were still cursing even more viciously and screaming even more miserably. However, they could not exist for much longer. Chapter 894. Sure enough, after a few breaths, the angels that were thousands of feet tall crumbled bit by bit, and the voice of the curse also gradually disappeared without a trace. The powder that the angel had turned into was like smoke, and with a slight ripple in the void, it naturally disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. At that moment, the projection of the entire age of the giant gods began to produce an inexplicable tremor. The tremor was extremely subtle and obscure, and if not for Luo Fan's extremely sensitive senses, paying attention to all changes in the entire Earth universe, he might not have been able to discover such a fluctuation. In such a fluctuation, indescribable wills from the various regions of the Earth universe that were gathered in an unknown distance across space and gradually condensed in the void around Luo Fan. These wills were all different, but they were all powerful and vast, and had an incomparably close connection with the entire age of the giant gods, as if they were some sort of incarnation of the age of the giant gods. Luo Fan's understanding of the age of the giant gods had even surpassed his understanding of the age of the end of age of the Earth universe. When he was still in the age of the end of age, there was a world of difference compared to now. Although he did not give up on the understanding of the Earth universe, it was not as deep as he was now as a void comprehender, and just by sensing the wills slightly, he knew that they were none other than the many giant gods that existed in the age of the giant gods, and were worshipped by all beings in the Earth universe. Blasphemy against the gods die. After these intents were condensed, a series of incomparably dignified voices containing boundless pressure rang out in the void space. It was as if the entire Earth and the universe were continuously crushing toward him. The voices rang out in the void space. Looks like it's still not enough. Luo Fan heard these voices. An inexplicable expression appeared on his face as he murmured. As he spoke, he could not be bothered with these wills, and raised his hand. The seal of destruction that had just crushed the god kingdom of the Lord of Light into powder instantly traversed the void, turning into the size of a fist and appearing in front of him. He raised his hand again and gently pointed, and the seal instantly split into hundreds of phantoms, directly pressing down on those wills. Those wills belonged to the giant gods. These giant gods were not even comparable to the Radiant Lord. Their wills had traversed an unknown distance of billions of light years to reach here. Although they were supported by the mysteries of the era of giant gods, they were at most at the level of annihilation. Such wills, how could it resist the suppression of the seal of annihilation? In just an instant, these consciousnesses didn't even have the time to clearly sense the situation here before they were directly crushed into nothingness by the seal of annihilation, and they didn't even have the time to scream. He disappeared without a trace. Even so, the seals did not stop at this moment. Instead, they suddenly swayed, grasping the traces left behind by the will in the process, and traced back to the source. It actually traversed through space and time to counterattack the source of these thoughts. This seal of annihilation was formed from the combination of a few tens of thousands of types of energy, and it had already pushed the might of the void comprehending stage to its peak state. Even if it was divided into a few hundred at this moment, its might would be slightly weakened. However, it was not something that an existence in the perishment realm could compare to. In the blink of an eye, in every corner of the Earth's universe, billions of light years away, where the giant gods were originally located, each of them produced a shocking explosion. The strong impact caused the projection of the entire giant god era to shake violently. The tremors were more than 100 times stronger than the tremors caused by the Lord of Light's death, so much so that ordinary beings could easily sense them. Of course, to ordinary beings, the tremors were like earthquakes. They simply could not relate it to the entire universe or the entire era shaking. It's finally enough. Let me see where you are. Luo Fan smiled faintly as he mumbled. Just now, the seals had traversed space and time to attack the giant gods' true forms. The giant gods simply could not anticipate it and could not put up any effective defense. Apart from a few giant gods who were usually extremely cautious and had persecutory delusions who could activate their own defenses in time and barely maintain the last shred of life from the seal's attack, the other giant gods were all killed by the seal, their Tao vanishing and their souls dispersing. The impact of such a change was untold times greater than the death of the Lord of Light. Almost all planets with intelligent beings were affected by such a change regardless of how many billions of light years they were apart. Almost all the giant gods had fallen, and in the giant god era projection in the Earth's universe, all divine idols that existed had basically crumbled, allowing every believer of the giant gods to clearly understand that their deity, the one and only powerful deity whom they believed to be the only one, had vanished without a trace. Such a situation made all the creatures of the age of giant gods instantly panic and unease, producing an indescribable resentment that reached the depths of the Earth's universe, triggering a deeper, intense reactions similar to the projection core of the era that Luo Fan had never sensed. That reaction caused the Earth's universe to tremble so violently. Amidst the tremors, a gaze shot down from the unseen, staring at Luo Fan, who was currently hovering in the void. This gaze was grand and vast to an unimaginable extent. Merely being looked at by it caused one's soul to tremble and feel as if it was practically impossible to move. It seemed as if the slightest fluctuation of this gaze would be able to completely shatter one's soul and cause one to become a walking corpse. However, such a gaze did not contain any ripples of emotion, as if it was the gaze of a mindless being. Such a gaze was basically lethal to ordinary Khanate Grand Luo cultivators, enough to cause their spirit to crumble and lose control. But to Luo Fan, it was nothing, and he was instead overjoyed. "I've really caught you." Such a thought flashed through his mind. Lifting his eyes, he stared directly at that gaze. His eyesight had long since reached an unbelievable level after he became a void comprehender. Space. Distance could no longer be an obstacle to him. With that, his gaze pierced through layers of space and time, penetrating the barrier of boundless laws and principles. It penetrated all the mysteries of the era of the giant gods that he thought he had reached into nothingness, and reached an extremely deep position, directly seeing the owner of the gaze that was shining on him at that moment. It was a giant who was lying flat in the void, his hands crossed over his abdomen. The giant's body flickered with a strange light. The light was mysterious, as if it existed, and yet it did not. It was as if all living beings could not see or feel it, but also seemed to be able to penetrate everything, as if it was more real than anything in the universe. The giant's eyes were slightly open at that moment, and two thin cracks could be seen. The gaze that was looking at Luo Fan came from those cracks, penetrating the boundless space and time, penetrating the barrier of boundless laws and principles, and directly locking onto Luo Fan. The moment Luo Fan saw the giant's hands that were originally crossed over his abdomen separated slightly, and he gently raised his right hand. He extended his index finger and gently tapped towards where Luo Fan was. It seemed to be extremely slow. It was extremely careless, but the moment it suddenly pointed over, Luo Fan felt that his entire body was locked on by an unimaginably powerful aura, and within that aura, he even felt as if he had become an ordinary person and was sealed in solidified cement. There was not even the possibility of his muscles twitching. At the same time, an extremely strong sense of danger appeared out of nowhere and directly wrapped around his spirit, making him feel that his spirit could collapse and perish at any moment. It seems that this is the will of the projection of the heavens and earth. Luo Fan saw this, but did not panic at all. Instead, he sighed with satisfaction. Of course, he was not a masochist, nor was he seeking death. Instead, he had absolute confidence that he would be fine and that he could withstand the giant's attack. With a thought, the power around his body vibrated, and in an instant, an extremely mysterious fluctuation was produced in this vibration. In an instant, relying on the vibration of this power, a human-shaped fluctuation formed on his body and suddenly magnified hundreds of millions of times, forming a huge human-shaped fluctuation phantom that was hundreds of millions of feet tall. With a sudden push, it completely wrapped around him. The mysteriousness of this fluctuation had reached an unimaginable level, and it contained all of Luo Fan's aura. If one only sensed this aura and did not rely on their eyes to observe, they would definitely not be able to distinguish between this fluctuation and Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, the aura that was originally locked on to Luo Fan suddenly disappeared without a trace, and was instead locked on to the fluctuation giant. When this change occurred, the strong sense of danger that had filled Luo Fan's mind and disappeared without a trace, and was replaced by a feeling of satisfaction that everything was under control. Luo Fan smiled slightly, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He raised his hand and pointed, and a speck of golden light rushed out from his hand, suddenly hitting the seal of destruction that Luo Fan had released. The speck of golden light contained the tens of thousands of powers that formed the seal, but the amount was more than tens of thousands of times greater than the power that formed the seal before. After receiving the speck of golden light, the seal suddenly trembled, and in an instant, it completely made up for the damage it had suffered from splitting into hundreds of pieces. Moreover, it took a step further, and the seal suddenly became many times more solid. It looked completely like a real seal. Moreover, the aura it emitted had skyrocketed by thousands of times, and the surrounding space within a range of tens of thousands of miles was directly turned into dust and mist by this aura. It formed a cloud of mist that appeared around the seal and churned. When all this was done, the finger that projected the will of the world had already traversed endless space-time and arrived above Luo Fan's head, and directly touched the huge fluctuation humanoid. Although the huge rippling humanoid figure was billions of times larger than Luo Fan, it was still like an ant compared to the finger. When the finger touched the rippling humanoid figure, it was like a huge planet crushing the body of an ordinary person. The power of the finger was unimaginably powerful, and it contained almost all the power and might of the entire age of the giant gods. When it came crushing down like that, not to mention that the fluctuation humanoid was specially created by Luo Fan to withstand this attack. Even if the fluctuation humanoid was specially created for battle, and he used all the strengthening methods he could think of on it, it would definitely not be able to withstand such crushing. Of course, this did not mean that Luo Fan was unable to resist the giant hand at all. Battles were not just about head-on clashes. Although the power of direct crushing was astonishing, as long as one was not crushed, the power would not really hurt them no matter how strong it was. Just like Luo Fan at this moment. The finger had originally been aimed at his body, but had it not been diverted to the fluctuation humanoid now? Had he not used this change to escape and ascend to heaven? The moment the finger crushed the fluctuation humanoid into powder, the annihilation seal was controlled by Luo Fan's mind. It suddenly followed the direction of the finger and burrowed into the void. In an instant, it traversed countless space-time, penetrated countless nomological laws, and arrived in the unseen place where the giant was lying. It suddenly enlarged by billions of times, turning into a size no smaller than the giant's head, and suddenly pressed down on the giant's head. The giant was a projection of the will of the world, and it did not have any energy, intelligence, emotions, or anything else that a normal living being could understand. However, this did not mean that it would not resist attacks that could threaten its body. This seal was a product of the void, comprehending realm's annihilation power to the limit. Luo Fan believed that even a Dao integration expert would not be able to remain unscathed after being hit by such an attack. Furthermore, this projection of the will of the world did not have any realm distinction at all. It was purely a vast and boundless will that was generated by the projection of the entire giant gods era. This kind of will controlled all the power of the projection of the entire giant gods era. It could control this vast and boundless power to do all kinds of things that ordinary cultivators could not imagine. However, it did not cultivate itself. It did not have the realm that ordinary living beings had. Under such circumstances, this projection of the will of the world naturally did not know how to cultivate. Naturally, it did not know how to condense a physical body, improve its strength, and enhance its power. Therefore, its body was simply the condensation of an unparalleled will. Not to mention the body of a Dao integration cultivator. Even the body of a destroyer cultivator was more powerful than this body condensed from intent. How could such a body withstand Luo Fan's seal, which had unleashed the annihilation power of the void, comprehending realm to the limit? If the projection of the world did not resist and allowed the annihilation seal to land on its head, no matter how strong the projection of the world will was, it would definitely be crushed by the annihilation power of the seal. It would turn into powder and disappear without a trace. Under such circumstances, the projection of the worlds will naturally would not allow the seal to land. A third eye suddenly grew between its brows. As soon as this eye grew, it suddenly opened and emitted a vast and boundless will that did not contain any emotion. It directly blasted towards the seal and wrapped around it, vaguely trying to cut off the connection between Luo Fan and the seal. This kind of will was vast and boundless. Even Luo Fan's was like an ant compared to this kind of will. If this kind of will was the will of a living being or the will of a void-comprehending expert, Luo Fan wouldn't have a chance at all. The connection between him and the seal would certainly be cut off, and it would be completely out of his control. If that was the case, he would naturally not be able to use the seal to deal with the projection of the world's will. Conversely, the seal would become the projection's weapon and be used against him. However, such a situation would naturally not occur. The world's will was the world's will. The way it operated and the form of its existence was not something ordinary living beings could understand. Naturally, the way it existed was completely different from ordinary living beings. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan had a chance. The world's will existed in such a profound and unfathomable form. In terms of form alone, it was countless times more profound than the will of living beings. However, this did not mean that the will of living beings was like an ant before the world's will and could not resist at all. The truth was the exact opposite. Although the world's will existed in such a profound and unfathomable form, it did not exist for the sake of fighting. In terms of fighting, this kind of will was naturally not comparable to the will of ordinary living beings. At this moment, the will emitted by the world had completely enveloped the seal of destruction. It looked like it was about to completely cut off the connection between the seal and Luo Fan, and was about to completely change the owner of the seal. However, with just a slight change in Luo Fan's thoughts, he changed his connection with the seal into another form that allowed him to travel through space and time. Without the help of any medium, he only relied on the connection of his mind to completely avoid the obstruction of the will of the world. Furthermore, he controlled the seal to tremble slightly, producing an incomparably pure destructive fluctuation that continuously disintegrated the will of the world that was wrapped around the seal. From this, it was easy to see the difference between the world's will and the will of living beings. If the will of a living being couldn't find the connection between the seal and its owner, then his obstruction would be completely useless. He wouldn't waste any more time and willpower. Instead, he would directly change his methods and use all sorts of other methods to obstruct the seal. Chapter 895. Although Luo Fan could not be said to have expected this, he did not feel that it was too unexpected. With a thought, the seal of destruction had already passed through the obstruction of the projected world's will and directly imprinted on the head of the world's will. The size of the seal was no smaller than that of the head. As it was imprinted, the head could no longer be seen from the surface. One could only see that the seal seemed to have replaced the head. Although the head was condensed from the will, it did not have a true physical body. But when the will was as strong as the world's will, the body that was condensed purely from the will was no different from a true physical body. The process of its destruction and disintegration was not much different from the disintegration of real flesh and blood. The moment the seal was imprinted, the head was like a smashed watermelon, directly disintegrating into countless fragments in all directions. During this process, the projection of the entire giant god's era began to shake violently. An extremely shocking wave of decay instantly swept through the projection of the entire giant god's era. The wave was so strong that even ordinary people could directly sense the decay contained in the wave and feel the pain contained in the wave. However, during this process, the world's will still did not show any emotion, nor did it make any sound. In fact, from the beginning, the world's will had never made any sound. It was like another form of existence, as if it did not know how to communicate with ordinary living beings. The destruction of the head might be fatal for ordinary living beings, but for the world's will projection, it was only an extremely serious injury. If one were to say that the world projection had been completely destroyed, Not to mention Luo Fan, even ordinary living beings would not believe it. Although the seal had completely shattered the head, causing it to splatter in all directions like a watermelon, the seal was still able to completely destroy the head. It had replaced the head with its own body. However, the will that projected the heavens and earth only used its other hand, other than the hand that had pointed at Luo Fan and was about to crush Luo Fan into powder. It suddenly raised its hand and stretched towards the seal. It opened its palm and instantly grabbed the seal. The seal represented the destructive power of the peak void comprehending stage. Its destructive power was so powerful that even the physical body of the void comprehending stage could not withstand it. The world's will projection could condense at will, but its strength was far from comparable to the physical body of a true void comprehending stage. Therefore, even though it had already grasped the seal, it could not withstand the destructive power of the seal. At the moment of contact, the seal erupted with astonishing power, directly crushing the huge hand that had wrapped around the seal, making it impossible for the world's will projection to grab the seal. However, the world's will projection was just too powerful. Although the palm was constantly being minced, it didn't stop at all during the entire process. Instead, it was still unceasingly moving forward. It continued to condense and continue to grab the seal. It tried hard to grab the seal, but it also seemed like it wanted to crush the seal. Under such circumstances, the seal's power erupted to its limit. Every moment, it destroyed a powerful will that was comparable to an exterminator. Every moment was equivalent to wiping out an exterminator. Sure enough, the world's projection was not created specifically for battle. Seeing this, Luo Fan finally felt completely at ease. With a slight thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure had already passed through the infinite space-time, passing through the barriers of the infinite rules and laws, and arrived at the place where the world's will was. It was unfathomable, unimaginable, and indescribable. It was even more illusory than the void. When he arrived, his figure directly floated above the world's will. He quietly looked down at the huge giant below, whose height could be measured in light years. All sorts of inexplicable expressions flashed through his eyes. Regardless of whether this will was created for battle or not, the power of this will was unimaginable to living beings. It was enough to shock any living being. As if sensing Luo Fan's arrival, the world's will projection slowly withdrew its other hand. It lifted its hand and pointed at Luo Fan. This process was the same as before. There was also an incomparably strong aura that locked onto Luo Fan, making him feel as if he couldn't move at all. He could only forcibly endure this finger, forcibly enduring the fate of being crushed into powder, dying, and having his soul scattered. However, even Luo Fan was able to easily dodge the finger of the will of the heavens and earth, let alone at this moment. With just a slight thought, the connection between him and the seal easily pulled him to the top of the seal, and with a gentle landing, he stood on the back of the seal. The seal was as big as the head of the projection, and the height of the projection could only be measured in light years. From this, it could be seen how huge the seal was. Even though this seal was condensed from Luo Fan's power, when he stood on it, he still felt that this seal seemed to be a complete world of its own. It was a huge world with a round sky and a square earth, boundless and boundless, with no end in sight. The moment Luo Fan's finger landed on the seal, it suddenly changed direction and continued to point at Luo Fan on the seal. However, during this process, the peerlessly powerful aura was unable to affect him in the slightest. It was as if the finger was just casually pointing at him and did not affect him at all. The reason for this was very simple. The powerful aura was just an application of willpower. The application of willpower was fatal to living beings, and it could cause an extremely strong pressure on the life source of living beings. However, when there was an item that could completely destroy all willpower, what use was this aura, no matter how powerful it was? The moment it approached the item, it would naturally be destroyed. How could it affect the living beings standing on the item at all? At that moment, the seal under Luo Fan's feet was an item that could completely isolate all willpower. When a finger pointed at him, the aura did not appear again. Luo Fan understood that he was completely safe standing there. The willpower of the world's projection could no longer affect him at all. Therefore, with a thought, he once again experienced changes and reached the peak of the void enlightening realm. He even sent out his perception, which was at the threshold of the Tao integration realm, into the powerful willpower of the world's projection. At that moment, an endless amount of information surged madly into his mind through his senses. The amount of information was so great that it could cause an existence in the death realm to explode at every moment. It was the power to turn cultivators in the annihilation stage into walking corpses. Such power was fatal to perishment realm cultivators, but it was nothing to Luo Fan, who was in the void enlightening realm. Of course, this did not mean that the willpower of the void enlightening realm was countless times stronger than the willpower of the perishment realm. Naturally, the situation could not be calculated in this way. The reason why the information that could make existences in the perishment realm explode at every moment was nothing to Luo Fan was because Luo Fan could easily accept all the information at every moment. Furthermore, during this process, he was able to digest the information at every moment, emptying his mind and returning to his peak state. He could easily accept the information that was transmitted at the next moment. Hence, during this process, Luo Fan's will and mental will did not need to be countless times stronger than those in the ruination realm. In fact, he only needed to be able to handle information that surpassed those in the ruination realm. However, during this process, he needed to digest the information at every moment. He needed to activate his mind at every moment and work hard to empty his mind. The information contained. It was the endless mysteries of the giant god's era. However, these mysteries were different from the mysteries that Luo Fan had seen through his eyes as a void, enlightening realm cultivator. On the surface, there was not much of a difference. However, on the inside, there was a world of difference between them at a deeper level. Vaguely, there seemed to be some strange network that linked the endless mysteries together. These networks were hidden extremely deeply. There were even deeper mysteries and even more unbelievable principles. Moreover, there were mysteries and principles that Luo Fan had never seen or sensed before. This clearly meant that these mysteries and principles were things that Luo Fan did not know at this moment. This meant that if Luo Fan could completely comprehend these mysteries and principles, it would greatly expand his perspective as a void enlightening realm cultivator and deepen the various things that he could see from the perspective of a void enlightening realm cultivator. As expected, the path ahead is indeed targeted at void enlightening realm cultivators. A thought suddenly flashed across Luo Fan's mind. As this thought appeared, he was even more certain that the path formed by the 9,999 checkpoints was the path of Tao integration or the path of transcendence. As these thoughts flashed across his mind, he did not hesitate at all. He continued to receive the endless information and extract the strange network from it, comprehending the profound principles and profound mysteries within. The void where the projection of the worlds will existed was an extremely strange space-time. Time and space were not obvious here. Under such circumstances, the flow of time here was naturally different from the outside world. The flow of time here was basically separated from the outside world. The flow of time here was not synchronized with the flow of time in the outside world. Of course, this did not mean that no matter how much time passed here, the time in the outside world would not pass much. Instead, it meant that the amount of time that had passed here could be any amount of time in the outside world. Perhaps an instant here would be millions of years in the outside world, or perhaps an instant would be the passing of millions of years in the outside world. Both of these extreme situations were theoretically possible. Of course, this was only in theory. In reality, the most likely scenario was that the flow of time in the outside world was slower than the flow of time here. A long period of time had passed here, but an extremely short period of time would only appear in the outside world. The reason was very simple. At this moment, the projection of the worlds was constantly being damaged. The damage to the worlds did not just mean that it was being damaged, but also that the projection of the entire giant gods era was being damaged. Although the damage was unlikely to be synchronized, it certainly could not be too extreme. Since the purpose of the existence of the worlds was for the giant gods era, the most likely scenario was that the projection of the worlds would strive to reduce the damage to the outside world. Under such circumstances, it was natural to speed up the flow of time in this strange space-time as much as possible. It was to give himself as much time as possible to adapt, hoping that after he survived this calamity, he would be able to cut off the damage to the universe caused by the damage to himself. That was why Luo Fan was able to pass through the countless barriers of space-time in such a relaxed manner. He arrived in this strange space-time. This was because he knew very well that he had a lot of time to squander. It was very likely that even if he stayed here for countless years, only a moment would have passed in the outside world. In such a relaxed situation, Luo Fan comprehended the mysteries of the strange meridians more easily and unhurriedly. Just like that, time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, in Luo Fan's senses, 100 years had passed. In the past 100 years, Luo Fan had not stopped comprehending the information transmitted from the projection of the will of the world. He had tried his best to comprehend the various mysteries and principles contained within it that he could not see after becoming a void-comprehending expert. Although he did not make many huge breakthroughs in his cultivation realm in the process, his void-comprehending realm had become increasingly stable. It allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the various mysteries and powers of the void-comprehending realm. At the same time, he understood the way the worlds will existed. Unknowingly, he had a deeper understanding than before. Although it was still impossible for him to fully understand the existence of the will of the heaven and earth, and it was even impossible for him to put his understanding into words, it allowed him to instinctively sense the possible reactions of the will of the heaven and earth when he encountered the will of the heaven and earth in the future. It was like when two people were together for a long time, and one of them could not clearly say who the other was, but if they were together for a long enough time, they would not be able to clearly come to a conclusion even if they could not. However, they would be able to roughly guess how the other person would react when they encountered something. At that moment, Luo Fan and the projection of the worlds were like these two people. The projection of the worlds was far too different from the will of ordinary living beings. Its form of existence was not something he could understand at all. However, after comprehending for 100 years, he already vaguely understood what kind of person the world's will was. Although he could not describe it, he could not completely understand its personality. He was familiar with it and could roughly guess how it would react to things. However, that was all there was to it. After experiencing the 100 years of constantly receiving information from the world's will, at a certain moment, he suddenly felt his mind become empty. The information that had constantly surged into his mind over the past 100 years, and was enough to make any existence in the death realm explode and turn them into walking corpses, was suddenly cut off. It was as if it had never appeared in the first place, disappearing without a trace. When this change appeared, Luo Fan's heart trembled. He sensed it slightly and found that the figure formed by the worlds had unknowingly shrunk to a height of 100,000 feet. The seal beneath his feet had also shrunk by who knows how many times, but it was still the size of the giant's head. A height of 100,000 feet. This was a height that could not possibly exist on Earth in Luo Fan's previous life. However, compared to the world's will, it was already extremely weak. It had shrunk by hundreds of trillions of times. It must not be forgotten that the figure formed by the projection of the worlds had to be described in terms of light years to be able to clearly describe its height. In comparison, a height of 100,000 feet or even light seconds would require tens of thousands of times to be stacked together. From this, the difference between them could be seen. It's a pity that the world's will is still too weak. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew why the information had suddenly been cut off. It was because the world's will had already become extremely weak and could no longer remain complete. The will had already become so weak that it could no longer maintain its existence. In other words, the reason why he could not sense the information was because the will of the giant gods era was about to die. In the past 100 years, the information that Luo Fan had received from his perception at all times was none other than the form of existence of the will of the projected world. At this moment, the projected world was about to be destroyed, so how could there be any more information about the form of existence that could be transmitted over? However, it's almost time. Luo Fan suddenly thought of something. Although it would be more beneficial for him if he could continue receiving the information for a longer period of time, he also knew that the benefits that the world's will could bring him were almost at its limit. In the depths of his memory, the endless information that he had received over the past 100 years had unknowingly reassembled into the form of a giant. It did not seem to be much different from the world's will projection at the very beginning. This situation was very obvious. It meant that Luo Fan was close to completely obtaining all the forms of existence of the will of the world. The remaining missing parts, apart from the bits and pieces that he hadn't yet received, were things that he couldn't obtain at this time. He couldn't even receive them, let alone understand them. Under such circumstances, continuing to receive the information might be beneficial for him, but it would not be too much. As the thought flashed through his mind, he did not hesitate to raise his hand and pat it lightly. The seal below suddenly enlarged, and with a tremor, the entire projection of the worlds will collapsed with a loud bang, directly turning into powder. Chapter 896. Amidst these changes, an endless amount of information suddenly exploded in his mind. He was about to be pulled into a lost state in an instant. This information was exactly the same as what he had encountered in the first third of the trial. It was the information backlash of this era's projection. The content was none other than the entire process of this era's projection until it was destroyed and replaced by another era. Of course, although it was essentially the same, the amount of information he received at this moment was worlds apart from the information backlash that he encountered in the first 1/3 of the checkpoint. The difference between the two was almost 10,000 times. In other words, at this moment, the information backlash he was facing right now was comparable to the information backlash of at least 10,000 era projections added together when he was at the first third of the checkpoint. The reason for this was very simple. It was because this era's projection was many times more realistic than the era's projection in the first third of the trial. The information projected was also many times more detailed. Under such circumstances, the entire process of everything in the projection being replaced by another era was naturally many times more complicated. This kind of information backlash was likely to make even those who had perished lose themselves. They would need a long time to recover. If an innate grand heavenly realm cultivator encountered this information backlash, his mind would probably be washed away and scattered in an instant. They would need tens of thousands of years to barely recover. It could be said that this had completely disqualified those innate grand heavenly realm cultivators from participating in the trial. However, it was clear that Luo Fan was no longer an exterminator. The enormous amount of information that could make an exterminator lost only caused him some pressure. The instant he enveloped the information with his newly refined senses, the information was automatically categorized and absorbed at an unimaginable speed. He had completely recovered within a few breaths. All of the information and the profundities contained within the information had been completely assimilated by him. A void comprehender was a state where one had comprehended all profundities and reached nothingness. If one wanted to advance to such a state, it would naturally not be as simple as the innate grand heavenly realm or the exterminator realm. Although the amount of information contained within the information backlash was more than 10,000 times more than the previous information, and the profundities it contained within it were also much more profound, there were very few things that were useful to Luo Fan. In other words, he had borrowed the senses of a void comprehender and could not sense them from a void comprehender's perspective. It could not even compare to what he had gained from comprehending the projected will of the world. However, it did not have much of an immediate effect on his cultivation state. It only allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the profundities of the void comprehender realm. With a slight thought, Luo Fan released his senses. He vaguely knew what the new trial after the 6,667th trial was. Soon, the projection of the Bridge of Time confirmed his suspicions. This is the 6,668th level, the 37th age before the end of days, the Four Spirits Age. The way to pass this level is to destroy this age. The voice came from nothingness and fell directly into Luo Fan's ears. Once Luo Fan received it, it immediately disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Luo Fan released his senses, wanting to find the location of the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge like before. However, he found that the depths of the space-time where the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge used to be was already empty. There were no traces of the treasure spirit. Following the source of the voice, it finally reached the depths of another space-time. It was also empty, without the slightest remnant of a will. Obviously, the treasure spirit was sending information to him in a way that was beyond Luo Fan's understanding. Sensing this, Luo Fan finally sighed. He knew that the consequences of his previous probing had already been revealed. The powerful figure hiding behind it could no longer be bothered to conceal it. With a slight sigh, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and he knew how much time had passed in the outside world during the 100 years he had spent in that strange space-time. It turned out that he had stayed there for 100 years, but it had only been a few days in the outside world. It was about the same as he had expected. After understanding this, Luo Fan was finally completely relieved. With a single thought, his mind connected with his main body in the universe on Earth through some mysterious channel. It had been more than 1,000 years since Luo Fan stepped on the Era Bridge. Because the flow of time on the Era Bridge was more than 10,000 times slower than in the outside world, more than 10 million years had passed in the Earth universe where Luo Fan's main body was. During these 10 million years, Luo Fan had been sorting out his worldview. At this moment, he had gained quite a lot. At the very least, he could use his own unique method to explain most things in the normal world. However, he could only explain most things in the normal world. He was still far from being able to explain the chaotic state, or even reach the state before the chaotic state. This made it impossible for Luo Fan to ignore it even if he had very low expectations. Moreover, Luo Fan was not someone who had low expectations. Instead, he was almost a perfectionist. How could he let it go so easily? Moreover, it was only 10 million years. For him, who cultivated for trillions of years, it was nothing. Even though there was a change in the Earth's universe every 5-6 billion years, reshuffling everything in the Earth's universe and causing all the cultivators in the Earth's universe to suffer a huge impact, these tens of millions of years were only a very short period of time. Due to these various factors, even if he had been sorting out his worldview for more than 10 million years. However, Luo Fan still did not have any impatient thoughts. Instead, he calmly continued to sort out his unique and completely different worldview. On this day, as Luo Fan was immersed in the deepest part of his thoughts, he suddenly felt a strange connection coming from the unseen world. With a thought, he knew that this was his clone contacting him. Without any hesitation, his mind sank into the channel. In the blink of an eye, everything that the Will clone had done over the years appeared in his mind without any reservation. Everything that the consciousness doppelganger had obtained was also copied by him without any reservations and became his harvest. In an instant, Luo Fan felt his power surge. Endless primal chi appeared out of nowhere in his body. His cultivation realm increased at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, he had completely broken through his original shackles and stepped into the Oblivion realm. He entered the void comprehending realm. In an instant, he had become a void comprehending realm. The relationship between the doppelganger and the main body was extremely close. Unless there were two perfect worlds, like the Earth universe and the untainted world, which were separated by the state of chaos, the doppelganger and the main body were one. Everything the doppelganger gained was the main body's gain. All the comprehensions of the clone were the comprehensions of the main body. When the clone became a void comprehending realm, the main body naturally became a void comprehending realm as well. Although Luo Fan still had not completely sorted out his view of the world, he had already gained a lot. At this moment, his cultivation was no longer that of the primordial golden core, but had undergone a subtle change. Unknowingly, it had already approached the great way of the fruit of the way of the untainted world. The existence form of his entire body that had turned into a flawless golden core had also completely disappeared. Instead, there was an existence similar to the Tao fruit in his lower abdomen. However, the existence that was similar to the Tao fruit was vastly different from the Tao fruit in the body of the primordial world's main body. It looked like a void, but it seemed to contain everything that could and could not be imagined by all living beings. It was mysterious. He had reached an indescribable state. The various gains sent back by the consciousness clone allowed him to become a void comprehending realm. It also stimulated the Tao fruit in his body. Endless primordial energy surged into it, causing the Tao fruit in his body to expand extremely. At the same time, it underwent various subtle changes, and its nature was greatly improved. According to the realm of the primordial world, he had already reached the peak of the zenith heaven golden Tao. Moreover, because the Tao fruit had changed after he sorted out his worldview, it was the most suitable for him. To him, its power was even more shocking than the Tao fruit of the primordial world. It could be said that at this moment, just the power brought by the Tao fruit made him comparable to an ordinary void comprehending realm cultivator. In addition to the realm of the void comprehending realm, the power of his mystical abilities was more than 100 times stronger than ordinary void comprehending realm cultivators. Sensing the changes in the Tao fruit in his body and the changes in the world in his eyes, Luo Fan could not help but smile faintly. I came at the right time, he thought. He looked forward, and his gaze pierced through countless space-time, illuminating all the mysteries of the space-time in front of him and reaching the most fundamental nothingness. This was already the limit that the clone could see. However, for his main body in the Earth universe, this was not the limit. He activated his Tao fruit and sensed the changes again. He pierced through the nothingness and saw a gray scene. That was the state of chaos. It was a strange place where countless perfect worlds were born. Time, space, matter, energy, and everything existed in a form that Luo Fan could not understand. This was also what Luo Fan needed at this moment. It was what he needed to sense to truly perfect his unique worldview. Of course, it was only a sense. Only existences above the saints could truly sense the chaos and comprehend the chaos. For living beings who had not reached the saint realm, the state of chaos was too complicated for them. Even if a saint could clearly explain their understanding to them and try their best to explain it in detail, they would not be able to understand it. Under such circumstances, if one wanted to use one's worldview to explain the state of chaos, it was naturally impossible to completely understand the state of chaos and then apply one's worldview to it. This was a common practice in the normal world. However, if he could comprehend the chaotic state, why would he still need his own worldview? At that time, he would have long since become a chaos essence Tao fruit. He had long since become immortal. Since he was already immortal, his worldview would naturally become incomparably complete. Why would he still need to tidy it up? Therefore, if one wanted to use one's worldview to explain the state of chaos, one could only construct a state of chaos according to the theory of one's worldview. Then, one could compare the constructed state of chaos with the real state of chaos. As long as there were no mistakes, it could be said that this worldview had already explained the state of chaos. As for the above, it explained the state before the state of chaos. Naturally, it was necessary to use the chaos state constructed by one's own worldview to deduce the previous state, and then use the results of this deduction to deduce the various possible characteristics of the chaos state. After that, compare it to the true state of chaos. If there was no mistake and it matched the facts, it could be said that he had used his own worldview to explain the state before the state of chaos. Of course, The results obtained by this method would definitely be flawed or even wrong. However, the more complicated the state of chaos constructed by using the world tube, the more factors or data it contained, the more realistic the results would be. The state of chaos explained by the worldview would also be closer to the true state of chaos. And as long as the state of chaos explained by the worldview reached a certain level of reality, it could support a cultivator in attaining the chaos essence Tao fruit and allow a cultivator to obtain immortality and an indestructible life. That was the meaning of the worldview's existence. When one truly attains the chaos essence Tao fruit and achieves immortality and indestructibility, one could comprehend the state of chaos at will. What one saw would be the truth. Why would one need to tidy up the worldview? Of course, this worldview would also lose its meaning. After Luo Fan's clone became an exterminator, he could already somewhat sense the state of chaos. He himself had also become an exterminator and could barely sense the state of primal chaos. However, it was still extremely blurry and indistinct. If he wasn't careful, he might mistake it for an illusion. It could not support him to tidy up his own unique worldview. The reason why his worldview was limited to the current step. It was also because of this restriction that it was limited to explaining the various things in the normal world. And at this moment, when he became a void-comprehending being, the Tao fruit in his body had directly allowed his void-comprehending being's sensing ability to achieve a qualitative breakthrough. He actually surpassed the limit and directly saw the boundless state of chaos hidden behind the Earth's universe, or rather, the state of chaos that enveloped the entire Earth's universe. This was simply a blessing from the heavens. It was no wonder that he was indescribably happy. Looking at the state of chaos in front of him and carefully sensing the various appearances within, Luo Fan instantly discovered the countless mistakes in a worldview that he had tidied up. In an instant, he extracted those mistakes and began to tidy them up again. He began to think again and reconstruct the worldview that he had already constructed, which was enough for him to reach the Daoyuo Metal Dao realm. Although he had denied most of his previous efforts, Luo Fan did not feel the slightest bit dissatisfied. Instead, he was indescribably happy. Discovering the mistakes meant that he had taken a big step towards the right. Was this not something to be happy about? As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the vast thousand domains that he was in returned to peace. In the process of the thought doppelganger on the bridge of times transmitting what he had learned back to his main body, he also sensed the various changes in his main body at the same time. In an instant, he felt that his perception and perspective as a void-comprehending being had been improved in an instant. Even the power in his body had taken another step towards the source of power. In just an instant, the power of his magical powers had increased by several times compared to before. It turns out that I've already reached this step. Although it's not as complete as the worldview inherited by Tao Lord Hercules, I instinctively agree with it. It really is the most suitable worldview for me. Luo Fan thought and could not help but sigh. His thought doppelganger was formed from power and was most suitable for cultivating the inheritance of Tao Lord Hercules. In these years of cultivation, he had cultivated from the primordial zenith heaven to the void-comprehending being at this moment. He had long been integrated with the inheritance of Tao Lord Hercules. The worldview of Tao Lord Hercules' inheritance was completely engraved in his instincts and could no longer be changed. At this moment, even if he instinctively agreed with the worldview that his main body had sorted out, he could not change his worldview at all. It was even more impossible for him to obtain the intrinsic benefits from the worldview that his main body had changed the way of cultivation into a brand new Tao. And this, in fact, was only secondary. If he did not obtain the intrinsic benefits, then he would not obtain the intrinsic benefits. In any case, he was seeking endless benefits at every moment on the bridge of times and was improving at every moment. Although it was a pity not to have those benefits, it was not too difficult to accept. What really made him sigh was that he had already understood that when a worldview of his main body was completely formed, it might be the time for this doppelganger to disappear. The reason was very simple. This doppelganger cultivated the inheritance of Tao, Lord Hercules. Although the worldview was incomparably perfect, it was still an inheritance from someone else. No matter how suitable it was for him, it could not be more suitable than the worldview that his main body had personally sorted out. When the worldview of his main body was completely formed, there would naturally be no need for this doppelganger to cultivate the other worldview inheritances. At that time, would there still be any meaning for his existence?